Chapter 385. There was a scorching flame in the air. Even the insensitive Guhan could feel the horror of the flame. If he was not careful, Guhan would become the first victim of the flame. However, how should he deal with this situation? Even with Ji Yuhan's IQ, in the face of this situation, it seemed that he could only be helpless. She's not called Ao Lin. She's Liuonian Ling. Therefore, Guhan decided to introduce Liuonian Ling himself. Guhan, you. Liuonian Ling was anxious. This Guhan actually said her real name. Of course, he had to say Liuonian Ling's real identity to stop Liuonian Ling from pretending to be Ao Lin. Guhan was not interested in playing the game of pretending to be weak with Liuonian Ling and Song Yifei. It seemed that this was not an appropriate description. It was also not an adjective. After all, Liu Lei had already told Song Yifei the goal of saving Liuonian Ling. It would be difficult to hide Ao Lin's identity at the end of the mission, and it would be exposed to Song Yifei sooner or later. If Guhan helped Liuonian Ling hide her identity now, then when Liuonian Ling's identity was exposed, Guhan would probably be hated by Song Yifei for the rest of his life as an accomplice. Guhan would not do such a stupid thing. Liuonian Ling? Song Yifei blinked his eyes and said playfully. She's the young mistress of the Liuonian family, the idiot who wants us to rescue and is trapped here? Idiot. Liuonian Ling felt a burst of anger. This was the first time someone used this word to describe her. She, Liuonian Ling, was outstanding in terms of intelligence. How could she be an idiot? Of course he's an idiot. Song Yifei continued, you are the lady of the most powerful family in the world. How could you ask 8 base cities to mobilize hundreds of sword bearers to save you? Aren't you an idiot? Do you know how much manpower and resources you've wasted in the base city? Liuonian Ling was rendered speechless by Song Yifei's backstabbing. In the end, it was Guhan who forced a smile and explained the situation to Song Yifei. He told Song Yifei that the reason so many people had come here was not to save her. Their main purpose was to obtain the rewards from the trial grounds, as well as to improve the compatibility between the sword wielders and the sword ladies when the Emperor's sword was born. After Guhan entered the next grid, he said to Liuonian Ling in his arms, all right, come down. Ha! Liuonian Ling decided to play dumb. Your leg is healed. You can come down now. Guhan ignored Liuonian Ling's act. He didn't wait for Liuonian Ling to come down herself and directly put her down on the ground. No matter how thick-skinned Liuonian Ling was, she was too embarrassed to continue clinging to Guhan. She could only stand up on her own. So it turns out that Ji Yuhan hugged Lin Ling because her leg was fractured. Song Yifei was very happy to see this. She thought that Guhan and Liuonian Ling were hugging each other like this because they were showing off their affection. It turned out that it was because Liuonian Ling's leg was fractured. It seemed that her chance was not completely gone. Lin, take out your map and tell me where we are now. Liuonian Ling quickly took out her electronic map. Guhan glanced at it and realized that they were still a long way from the final destination. It was impossible to reach the final destination in a short period of time. When he looked at the time again, it was already midnight. There was no night in the trial formation. The surroundings were as bright as day. There was no way to tell the passage of time. Let's rest here for the night, Guhan suggested. He looked at Qingpin, who was sleeping soundly in the infant pouch. He was also feeling quite tired. Sufficient energy is more important than speed. I don't mind. I haven't had a good night's sleep for the past 2 weeks. Liuonian Ling agreed from the bottom of her heart. Due to loneliness and other factors, Liuonian Ling had not had a good night's sleep. There were a few nights where she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. If Liuonian Ling had not used the Liuonian clan's secret method to boost her energy and used a large amount of Laoshan white snake grass water to support her, she would have collapsed a long time ago. Now that Guhan mentioned sleep, a huge wave of exhaustion surged into Liuonian Ling's heart. At this time, Liuonian Ling's uneasiness and loneliness had already left her. All that was left was exhaustion. Me too. I'm exhausted from the few battles just now. Song Yifei's eyes were a little unfocused. It seemed like she was still full of energy. As long as he did not touch the small bar in the cubicle mission would not be triggered. As long as Guhan did not sleep in the cubicle for 7 days and 7 nights, the cubicle would not do anything to him. In the dimensional pocket, there was a complete set of camping equipment distributed by the Sword Committee. The cubicle was spacious enough. Very soon, Guhan had set up his tent. The bed inside was clean and comfortable. There was also air conditioning, TV, shower, and other equipment. It was no different from a home. I'm so tired. I'm so tired. I don't want to set up my own tent. Guhan, lend me your bed. Liuyan Ling did not even take off her clothes. She directly threw herself onto Guhan's bed. Within a few seconds, she closed her eyes. Her breathing was even and rapid. It seemed like she had really fallen asleep. I'm so tired too. Song Yifei saw that. No, I can't lose my momentum. Therefore, she imitated Liuyan Ling and lay down on Guhan's bed. She groaned a few times and fell asleep. When Ji Han saw this, the muscles on his face twitched unnaturally. Can the two of you go take a shower first? No one cared about Ji Han, because they were all in dreamland. Guhan was completely helpless. He was too lazy to take a shower. A wave of exhaustion surged from Guhan's heart to his eyes. Guhan yawned and put Qingpin and Ji Yun on an empty spot on the bed. He took a blanket and made a bed in the tent. That was how he slept for the night. When Guhan woke up the next morning, he found that his body was extraordinarily heavy. He opened his eyes and saw that Qingpin had climbed from the bed to the ground and was lying on Guhan's chest. While sleeping, Qingpin unconsciously locked her feet with her hands. What is this? A toe-digging loli? However, Guhan felt that something was wrong with the weight. Qingpin should not be so heavy. Therefore, Guhan found that there was a loli on top of him. Ji Yun was also curled up beside Guhan, holding one of Guhan's hands and constantly nibbling on Guhan's arm. It was sticky with the loli's saliva. These two. Guhan shook his head helplessly. These two little loli seemed to have a passive skill of automatically throwing themselves into Guhan's arms. No matter where Guhan was lying, they could climb to his side and then closely cling to him as they fell asleep. After putting the two little guys back in place, Guhan got up from the ground. He glanced at the bed that should have belonged to him. Song Yifei and Liuyan Ling were still in their respective dreams. These two little girls were at each other's throats yesterday, but now their lying posture showed infinite ambiguity. The two of them hugged each other like octopuses. Moreover, both of their hands were very dishonest, especially Liuyan Ling. No one knew what she was doing in her sleep, but she actually touched more than half of Song Yifei's top. Half of the soft flesh that was wrapped in the bra was exposed, and it was very dazzling. Song Yifei was not bad either. Liuyan Ling's hand attacked her chest, and she went to deal with Liuyan Ling's lower body. Song Yifei's hand directly went under Liuyan Ling's skirt, and her arm was even twitching. No one knew what interesting things she was doing to Liuyan Ling's absolute territory. Poochie. Poochie. Seeing this scene that was filled with the love of a lady, Ji Han's breathing instantly became heavy. Little Ji Han also started to raise his head with all his might, trying to break free from the restraints of his pants. Guhan did not dare to look at these two girls again. He quickly rushed into the shower room to take a cold shower, and barely managed to suppress the fire. He did not even eat breakfast, and left the tent as if he was fleeing for his life. Outside, he began to meditate and clear his meridians. He was trying to calm down the sword chi of the 3 green lotus swords by practicing the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. After such a period of recovery, around 80% of Guhan's meridians had recovered, and he had more or less recovered his previous fighting ability. However, what made Guhan feel helpless was that as the meridians of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven gradually recovered, the 3 green lotus swords of mysterious heaven had inexplicably improved a lot. He had obviously not practiced the green lotus 3 swords, but somehow, it had improved by a lot. 2 of his meridians for the green lotus 3 swords had been unblocked, and there were only 3 meridians left for Ji Han to master the first sword of the green lotus 3 swords. According to Guhan's estimation, if this continued, then it was very likely that within 3 months, the first sword of the 3 green lotus swords would automatically be mastered. Guhan really wanted to stop this uncontrollable training, but he was helpless. This was a process that could not be stopped. Practicing the 9 black heaven swords of mysterious heaven was just a prelude. As long as Guhan wanted to fight, then the 3 green lotus swords would automatically be practiced. Unless Guhan stopped fighting, then it would be impossible to stop the crazy momentum of the 3 green lotus swords. But this was impossible. No matter what, Guhan could not stop fighting. If he could not fight, then what was the point of fighting for the first half of his life? Fine. Guhan threw these things to the back of his mind. If he could not find a way to control him before he mastered the first sword of the 3 green lotus swords, then he could only let nature take its course. As a sword wielder, he never lacked women. If it really did not work, then he would just eat when Mayun. She was just a piece of meat next to his mouth. Chapter 386. At noon, when the sun was at its highest, the howls of beasts suddenly came from the Yeyang fort, which was shrouded in a thick cloud of black smoke. It was not the howls of a single beast, but the howls of countless beasts at the same time. The howls were so loud that it seemed as if the entire earth was shaking. Oh no, Yuan Ku is making a big move. Hurry up and report this to the base city. The captain of the scouting team, who had risked his life to lurk around the black smoke, was so scared that his hair stood on end. He quickly reported the location of the Yeyang fort to the base city. The base city of Yuzhang immediately became nervous when they received the news. The sword-bearers were all told to return to their homes or to their respective assembly points to await further orders. At the same time, another 5 scouting teams set off from their respective strongholds to scout around half of the Yeyang fort. However, the strange thing was that although the black smoke kept howling, there was no concrete movement. Even the roars stopped after more than 20 minutes, and the entire black fog returned to its tranquil state. Thus, the strange howling incident came to an end. In the next 2 days, there were no other movements from Fort Yuyang. However, this made Liu Lei and Zhu Wudao very vigilant. They added more sword-bearers to the scouting team and started to patrol the entire Yuzhang city. Unfortunately, they found nothing. "Spare me, my lady. Spare me, my lady." A golden-furred monster with a bull's face and monkey's ears was sent flying by Qingpin's sword. It fell to its knees and started kowtowing desperately, begging Qingpin to spare its life. This was the 9th Yuan Ku that Qingpin had killed that day. After a good night's sleep, Qingpin fought under Guhan's pressure for the rest of the day. Any combat room that required a fight with a Yuan Ku would be handled by Qingpin. As a result, Qingpin used her teeth to leave dozens of deep bite marks on Guhan's body. However, on the other hand, Qingpin's combat ability had reached a very good level. For example, the little monster Little Diamond Wind, who had been singing "The King Called Me to Patrol the Mountain," had been defeated by Qingpin by herself. Guhan had not given her any instructions at all. In terms of exam results, before entering the trial, Guhan would at most give Qingpin 5 marks for her sword skills. However, now, Guhan felt that Qingpin could at least get 70 marks, based on the ancient sword Maiden test paper. This meant that the child's talent in swordsmanship was extremely high. It was just that she was a little too lazy, which was why Ji Yuhan used such forceful methods to force her. "Yuan Ku, aren't you a memory fragment of His Majesty Zetian? If you want to leave, how can we stop you? Just admit defeat." Song Yifei sneered at Little Diamond Wind, who was kowtowing and begging for mercy. "That's right, Little Diamond Wind can run away on his own. Why should he beg for mercy?" The little monster finally realized that he did not need to beg for mercy. He could just admit defeat and leave. He scratched his head in frustration, and the cow lice scattered all over his body. "I'm sorry, I'm used to it when I was a monster. It's just a habit, a habit." After saying that, Little Diamond Wind ran away like a puff of smoke. He really did run away like a puff of smoke. With Journey to the West as proof, whenever a monster wanted to escape, there would always be an explosion, followed by a puff of smoke, and they would escape. "I'll throw this." Song Yifei grabbed the die before Guhan could. Song Yifei seemed to be surprisingly fond of throwing dice and drawing cards. Ever since the 3 of them had formed a team, Song Yifei had taken care of everything. 6666666. Song Yifei kept shouting 6 as he threw the die. Naturally, he hoped that his die would roll a 6. Tch. Only an idiot would do that. Liuyan Ling muttered disdainfully. However, something amazing happened. After the die spun a few times, the side with a 6 appeared on the top. Yes. This is my strength. Song Yifei showed off proudly, which made Liuyan Ling gnash her teeth. However, she could not refute him. After all, he did roll a 6. Guhan and the others continued to walk forward. The light walls opened up one by one, making way for Guhan and the others to move forward. According to previous experience, there should be 6 light walls opened up, which meant that Guhan could move forward 6 squares. However, when the light wall opened up to the 5th one, the last light wall stopped disappearing. Guhan and the others were stuck at the 5th step. What's going on? Did I make a mistake? Have we already moved 6 steps? Song Yifei said confusedly. She had been counting her steps all this time. How could she make a mistake for no reason? No, this is the 5th room. I don't know why we're stuck here. Liuyan Ling walked around the room, trying to see if there was anything unusual in the room. However, she could not find any clues. Could it be that the trial array has gone out and mistook the 6 I rolled as a 5 ? Song Yifei guessed naively. After all, this array has been going on for more than 700 years. It's not strange for there to be a small problem. No, it's not like what you said. The small bar in the middle of the room did not rise. This means that we did not trigger the task mechanism of the entire room. Guhan said. Logically speaking, after each advancement, the small bar would rise within a minute to indicate the way to pass through the entire room. However, it had been about 10 minutes, and the small bar had not risen. Did this mean that there was a special trigger condition for this room? Guhan pondered for a while. He suddenly raised his head and said to Liuyan Ling, "Ling, give me your electronic map. Hurry." Under Guhan's urging, Liuyan Ling handed her electronic map to Guhan. Guhan glanced at it and his expression relaxed. "I know what's wrong." "What? What's wrong?" Hearing Guhan's words, Song Yifei and Liuyan Ling gathered together to listen to Guhan's explanation. Guhan stretched out his finger and pointed at a grid with a red mark on the map. "This is our current position. Take a look and see what's different about this position." Liuyan Ling took a closer look and found that they had reached a very critical position. She immediately said, "This is the intersection point of the 2 paths. The path that extends from the other starting point will converge here." "It's true. It's like a Y shape." Song Yifei also realized this in shock. "Yes, I think this should be the reason why we are stuck here. This is the intersection point of the 2 paths. I think there must be some special task that we need to complete, so we are stuck here. We can't move forward anymore." Guhan gave the final conclusion, which was reasonable and convincing. "But what special task do we need to complete? There is not a single hint here," Song Yifei said with a frown. Since he met Liuyan Ling, Song Yifei seemed to have become more and more adorable. "Wait." Guhan took out his own tent from his pocket and began to set it up. "Maybe we have to wait for a long time. My dear brother, how long do we have to go?" In a room, 2 white-robed swordsmen said to each other. The Green sect called each other brothers, and they rarely called each other by their names. "I don't know. Dear Allah, I really want to leave this place immediately. I don't even know which direction to pray in," the other white-robed swordsman complained. Jerusalem base city was probably the base city with the best preservation of religious rituals before the Great Destruction. Most of the rituals of the Green sect had been preserved and passed down. For example, they had to pray in the direction of the holy city of Mecca every day at 5 times, morning, noon, afternoon, dusk, and night. The reason why they had to pray in that direction was because the founder of the Green sect, Muhammad, had prayed to Allah in the white square house of Mecca. Therefore, all the Green sect disciples would pray in that direction. The 5 times a day of worship was a pious ritual that every Green sect follower must observe. Even if one of the 5 times was missed, it would be a great sin, and if it was reported, it would be punishable by death. Therefore, the 2 swordsmen from Jerusalem were complaining that they could not tell the direction, and could not complete their prayers. It had been 2 days since they had last prayed. It would not end well for them if word got out. The two white-robed swordsmen knelt in front of a veiled woman behind them and asked, "Saintess, what should we do? We haven't prayed to the great Allah for 2 days." The woman should be a saber-rank swordsman, but her status in Jerusalem base city was very high. It was so high that the two saber-rank swordsmen were willing to kneel in front of her and ask for her orders. Allah is supreme. His power is above all things. When necessary, you don't have to pray in the direction of Mecca. You just need to recite Allah's name in your hearts, and Allah will feel your devotion and forgive your mistakes. The voice of the saintess was like the voice of the heavens under the veil. Everyone who heard it could not help but feel a sense of respect. "Yes, saintess, we understand." The two white-robed swordsmen each chose a direction and prayed to the Allah in their hearts. Under the veil, the saintess sighed softly. No one knew what she was thinking. The two white-robed swordsmen seemed to have forgotten that the saintess had also missed 2 days of praying. Chapter 387. Jerusalem base city was the only city among the 8 base cities controlled by religion. It was the strangest existence among all the base cities. In order to control more power and have more swordbearers, other cities implemented a system of equal rights for men and women, so that both men and women could become great swordbearers. However, Jerusalem base city was different. They strictly followed their religious laws and stripped women of their rights. They could only become vassals and accessories of men. If the male swordbearers in Jerusalem took a fancy to a woman, they could snatch the woman into their hands without paying any price and make her their slave. Every time, the swordbearers in Jerusalem would have 10 or even hundreds of female servants. One could imagine the living conditions of the women in Jerusalem. Originally, Jerusalem was still an ordinary base city 600 years ago. Although religion flourished because most of the residents were from the Green religion, it had not reached the stage where religion controlled the entire city. The city was still controlled by a peaceful and democratic sword committee formed by a large number of swordbearers. There was also a state of relative equality between men and women. However, with the appearance of Al-Jendi, everything changed completely. Al-Jendi was originally just a hooligan on the streets of Jerusalem. He lived until the age of 30, but he was still a useless ordinary person and was always bullied. Then, one night, he suddenly told the people around him that Allah had given him a decree, saying that the catastrophe of this world had just begun. In the year 6666, the greatest and most terrifying catastrophe would happen. Allah descended his true body on him and used his body to tell everyone that as long as they believed in Allah's neo-green religion, the world would be saved. At first, naturally, no one believed the hooligan's nonsense. They only thought that the hooligan had gone mad from hunger, so no one paid any attention to him. Al-Jendi preached for a total of 49 days without eating or drinking, but he only managed to gather 9 believers. 6 of them were insane. Then, on the 49th day, Al-Jendi suddenly announced that Allah's power had arrived. He would become a sword-bearer and protect all those who believed in him. As a result, on the day he said this, a bolt of lightning suddenly fell from the sky. An ancient sword-bearer descended from the sky and landed in front of Al-Jendi. Thus, Al-Jendi held the ancient sword in his hand and instantly completed the synchronization. He turned from a beggar to an ancient sword-bearer, and his ancient sword-bearer was the ancient sword-bearer of the 6 faiths of Jerusalem. As this miraculous event happened, Al-Jendi gradually gained many believers among the poor, but the mainstream society did not care about Al-Jendi. What divine sword from heaven? What reincarnation of Allah? These were all methods used to deceive the ignorant. As long as one had the intention, whether it was through technology or sword-bearers, it could be done. 81 days after Al-Jendi became an ancient sword-bearer, he once again announced that Allah's power was coming. This time, he would become a sword-bearer of the sword. Compared to the first time, when there were only 9 believers, the second miracle had thousands of people kneeling in front of Al-Jendi. Then, they witnessed the miracle of the divine sword from heaven again. Al-Jendi also became a sword-bearer of the 6 faiths, and the sword of future sword-bearer appeared in front of the world. In this way, after several years of development, when the senior management of the Jerusalem Base City Sword Committee began to really pay attention to the entire religion of the new Green sect, Al-Jendi had become a sword-bearer of the Spirit Sword, holding the ancient sword of the Six Faiths, the sword of future sword-bearer, the sword of future sword-bearer, the famous sword of the classic sword, and the sword of the angel sword. The attitude of the Sword Committee towards this new sword-bearer of the Spirit Sword, who had a religion in his hand, was full of doubts about the sword spirit of Allah. They even intended to banish this sword-bearer of the Spirit Sword. However, the sword spirit of Allah eventually stayed in the Sword Committee and continued to fight for the city of Jerusalem, defeating one powerful opponent after another. His new green sect also became a model of good citizens, helping the Sword Committee and the Council to maintain the peace of the entire city of Jerusalem. Gradually, the attitude of the whole city of Jerusalem toward the sword spirit of Allah changed from doubt to trust, and the sword spirit of Allah continued to use his miraculous method to become an emperor sword-bearer. Finally, he ascended the throne in Jerusalem and took over all the rights of the Sword Committee of Jerusalem. Then everyone thought that Al-Jendi was going to show his true colors. Of course not. Al-Jendi played the role of the savior all his life, and the whole city of Jerusalem was also full of harmony and peace, which made people worship Al-Jendi to the highest level. All the citizens really believed that Al-Jendi was the incarnation of Allah, and the new green sect was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. What really changed the city of Jerusalem was the 9 disciples of Al-Jendi, the 9 believers who were around Al-Jendi when he became an ancient sword-level sword-bearer. It was said before that 6 of the 9 believers were mentally ill, but these 6 mentally ill people all returned to normal when they followed Al-Jendi's teachings. When Al-Jendi ascended, all 9 disciples became immortal sword-level sword-bearers. Until now, except in the first 100 years after the apocalypse, no base city had been able to break this record and have as many as 9 immortal sword-level sword-bearers. It was the believers of these 9 immortal sword-level sword-bearers who began to bring Jerusalem into the abyss of religion, allowing religion to regain control of humans and fully revive the new green sect in Jerusalem. These 9 believers were also called the 9 saints by the people of Jerusalem, and they enjoyed the worship of the world together with Al-Jendi. The power structure of Jerusalem was similar to the structure of the Sword Council to some extent. Their highest authority was called the Council of Referees, and the chairman of the Council of Referees was called the Prophet, meaning the person who inherited the will of Al-Jendi. The 6 swords of Al-Jendi were called the 6 divine swords of faith by the city of Jerusalem. They were the sword of foresight at the ancient sword level, the sword of posterity at the treasure sword level, the sword of classic at the famous sword level, the sword of angel at the spirit sword level, the sword of prophet at the immortal sword level, and the sword of Allah at the emperor sword level. These 6 godly swords had been researched by countless historians and religious scholars. They had never appeared before the sword emperor of Allah, and no one knew the origin of these 6 godly swords. It was as if they really had descended from the heavens, appeared out of nowhere, and were bestowed by Allah. Therefore, these 6 swords became the highest sacred objects of the city of Jerusalem and the supreme tools to determine the prophet of the city of Jerusalem. Do you want to be the prophet of Jerusalem? It's very simple. You just have to synchronize with the sword of prophet. As long as you can synchronize successfully with the sword of prophet, then you can become a prophet. Some people asked, what if some immortal sword-level sword-bearers did not synchronize successfully with the prophet, but they synchronized successfully with the sword of Allah when they advanced? Could the prophet continue to be a prophet? Of course not. According to the law, the sword-bearers who mastered the sword of Allah were the true supreme leaders and prophets of Jerusalem. However, ever since Ra Sword Emperor, the Ra sword had never been able to synchronize with anyone else. It had been lying quietly in the sword pavilion. Only the true savior, when the world is facing its greatest crisis, will the sword of Allah be born again and lead humanity to salvation. This was one of the core doctrines of the New Green Church, which meant that the sword of Allah would not be born until the moment of the greatest crisis in the prophecy of Al-Jendi 666 years later. Once the sword of Allah was born, the sword-bearer of the sword of Allah could lead humanity to salvation. Of course, this was a common tactic used by religions. The other base cities would turn their noses up at it. At the same time, according to the prophecy of Al-Jendi, when the greatest crisis came, men would fight bravely for the world, but women would drag men down and eventually drag the entire human world into destruction. It was precisely because of this prophecy that the status of women in Jerusalem was reduced to a little higher than livestock. They began to prohibit women from going out, requiring women to wear veils, not allowing women to touch sword maidens, and never allowing women to become sword-bearers. Gradually, women became the original sinners among the people of Jerusalem, sinners who would destroy the world. They also once appealed to other base cities not to let women become sword-bearers, to limit the power of women like them, and to let women be responsible for giving birth to children, to be a fertility machine, and to never let women intervene in other things. In this regard, other cities naturally scoffed at this. But in the city of Jerusalem, this rule was most strictly enforced. For hundreds of years, the city of Jerusalem had not produced a native female swordsman, which showed the strength of the Jerusalemites' enforcement of this rule. But 2 years ago, this rule was broken, and a woman became the sword-bearer of Jerusalem and the first saintess of the new Green Church in history. Because something earth-shattering happened to this woman. On the day when this woman had just turned 18, her father planned to sell her for 18,000 to a sword-bearer as a female slave. The sword of Qianding flew out of the sword pavilion and fell from the sky, just like Allah Jendi back then, taking the initiative to become this woman's sword-bearer. A year later, when this woman's sword element broke through 1,000 points, the sword of Qianding also forcibly broke free from the protection of countless people, descended on this woman's head, and took the initiative to become her sword-bearer. In this regard, the entire Jerusalem Inquisition argued for a whole year, and finally passed a resolution to confer this woman as the saintess of the new Green Church, and declared that she was the female slave of Allah. Yes, the saintess was still a female slave, but she was the female slave of Allah, which did not conflict with the doctrine of the new Green Church. It was perfect. Chapter 388. They are here. Guhan, who had been meditating outside the tent, slowly opened his eyes. He had been waiting in the room for 5 hours. The peace in the room had finally been broken. What's here? Song Ifei came out of the tent and saw that the wall of light on one side had disappeared. 3 white-robed swordsmen walked over from the other side. Song Ifei had never seen anyone dressed like that. Due to the ethnic conflicts, Jerusalem was not well received by the other cities. Most ordinary people only knew that Jerusalem was one of the 8 base cities, but the specific situation of Jerusalem base city was a big question mark. In fact, as long as the system collected information on the internet, it was not impossible to find information about Jerusalem. For example, Guhan had collected a lot of information about Jerusalem through the internet, so he was not completely clueless about the situation in Jerusalem. After all, Guhan might have to pay a visit to Jerusalem in the future. These are the swordsmen of Jerusalem. I didn't expect the second one to arrive here to be from Jerusalem. Liuyan Ling walked out of the tent with Jiyu Yun in her arms. If one were to ask Guhan who among the 3 knew the most about Jerusalem, it would be Liuyan Ling without a doubt. The Liuyan family had close ties with Jerusalem. As the successor of the most powerful family in the world, it was only natural that Liuyan Ling had a deeper understanding of every city. I didn't expect to see you here. Miss Liuyan Ling Ashima pays her respect to you. The 3 people in white robes were the Holy Maiden of Jerusalem and her 2 male teammates. The Holy Maiden was confused when she saw that there were people in the next room. When she saw Liuyan Ling, she was dumbfounded. It seemed that they had entered the trial grounds to find the missing Liuyan Ling. Now that they had accomplished their mission, could they consider leaving? Are you the Holy Maiden, Ashima? Liuyan Ling walked up to Ashima with Jiyu Yun in her arms. She exuded the aura of a superior, suppressing the Holy Maiden of Jerusalem so much that she couldn't even lift her head. Liuyan Ling wondered what kind of face and expression the Holy Maiden had under the veil. Yes, I am Ashima, Miss Liuyan Ling. The Holy Maiden lowered her head in a submissive manner. Interesting. Those stinky old men from Jerusalem actually shamelessly made up stupid words like Allah's slave to justify themselves. It must have been hard on you. Liuyan Ling sneered. The 2 white-robed swordsmen beside the Holy Maiden were embarrassed and angry. They wanted to grab Liuyan Ling's clothes and argue with Liuyan Ling, but the Holy Maiden pulled them behind her. Miss Liuyan Ling, you're wrong. Ashima is indeed Allah's slave. Ashima will serve Allah for the rest of her life, Ashima said in a pious tone, as if she really was Allah's slave. "Oh, you're so willing to be that Allah's slave?" Liu Ling pondered for a while, then suddenly asked seriously, "What if you're not wrong, but Allah wants to whip you?" "A slave should bare her chest and accept Allah's whip. It's a slave's fortune to be able to receive Allah's love with her lowly body," Ashima said meticulously. Ashima spoke meticulously, and the radiance of devotion on her face could almost be seen through the veil. "What if there's no water around, but Allah wants to wash his feet?" Liu Ling continued to ask. "As a slave, I should use my lips and tongue as a towel to lick away all the dirt and dust that the true Lord has added." Ashima answered without hesitation, as if the answer came from the bottom of her heart. "What if there's no spittoon around, but Allah wants to spit?" Liu Ling continued to ask. "A slave should use her body as a spittoon and her throat as a mouth to receive Allah's holy spit." Damn. Guhan, what's wrong with that Liu Ling? Why would she ask that woman such disgusting questions? I can't stand it, just hearing these questions makes me feel disgusted. Song Ifei said to Guhan with a displeased expression. The conversation between fleeting Timeling and Ashima had crossed the bottom line of human humiliation. To think that the two of them were able to conduct their conversation in such a serious manner, and that the people who heard their conversation could see a hint of holy light emanating from their bodies. "Guhan, is this woman really the Liu Ling who had a heated argument with me just now? Why do I feel like I don't know her anymore? Her persona has changed too fast." Song Ifei continued to complain. "Also, why do I feel like this Liu Ling is like that Saintess master? It seems like that Saintess is very afraid of Liu Ling, isn't she the Saintess? The noblest woman in Jerusalem? Why does it seem like that woman owes Liu Ling a lot of money?" "It's not a matter of money." Guhan shook his head. Back then, Kanzu built a total of 3 base cities, and Jerusalem was one of them. The Liu family had natural sovereignty over Jerusalem, and the prophets of Jerusalem were all very respectful to the Liu family. "I see. According to what you've said, this Liu Ling is actually this Saintess landlord." Song Ifei made a very incisive conclusion. At the same time, the interesting conversation between Liu Ling and Ashima reached its last sentence. Liu Ling asked Ashima a total of 10 questions, all of which were disgusting and challenging the limits of human dignity. In the end, the Saintess answered all of them, from eating shit, swallowing phlegm, to sitting on a meat stool, and decorations. Compared to the Saintess answering all of the questions, Song Ifei admired Liu Ling even more for being able to ask all of them. If it were Song Ifei, she probably wouldn't even be able to ask a single question. "Lady Saintess." The other 2 sword-bearers looked at Ashima with admiration in their eyes. The Saintess was too pious. Only such a woman was worthy of being the slave of the Almighty God. "Very well, your God will like you." Liu Ling smiled at the Saintess, then left Ashima and returned to Guhan's side. Phew. The Saintess let out a long sigh of relief. It felt as if she had passed an important interview. At this moment, the room began to change. The small bar counter that had never appeared before rose from the ground for the first time. Guhan walked up and looked at the notification on the counter. His expression didn't change at all, as if he had already guessed the mission of this room. "Come and take a look, Saintess." "Your Saintess." Gu Han gestured for Ashima to take a look at the notification on the small counter. "Thank you." Ashima nodded at Guhan respectfully. Although she didn't know who Guhan was, she shuddered at the sight of Liu Ling standing behind Guhan with a gentle and considerate expression. How terrifying must this man be to be able to subdue such a terrifying young lady like Liu Ling? Ashima walked over to the small counter with light steps. She glanced at the notification on the counter and furrowed her brows deeply. This was what was written on it. Only the courageous will emerge victorious. The mission of this room will only be unlocked when 2 teams gather at this meeting point. The 2 teams that arrive at the room first must fight to decide who can move forward. The team that surrenders first or loses the ability to fight will be deemed to have lost. Group battles are not allowed. Only one-on-one battles are allowed. The winner will be able to move forward while the loser must stay and wait for the next team to arrive at the meeting point. If the loser stays for more than 7 days, it will be declared a complete failure and the team will be automatically teleported out of the trial. The notification was very detailed and clear. It was very simple. It was a battle between Guhan and the Saintess. The winner would continue to move forward while the loser would wait for the next opponent. In fact, not long after entering the room, Guhan had roughly guessed the routine of this room. Hence, he had been meditating with his eyes closed while waiting for his opponent to arrive. On the other hand, Ashima's side wasn't calm. She turned around and whispered something to her two companions behind her. Ashima walked out and bowed to Liuyan Ling. Respected Miss Liuyan Ling, Jerusalem doesn't dare to make an enemy of you. We are willing to surrender. Please leave with your companions. You're surrendering just like that. Song Ifei, who was a little worried that she would be a burden to the team due to her lack of experience in fighting a sword wielder, suddenly realized that her team had won so easily. She pinched the soft flesh on Guhan's waist in disbelief and asked in a daze. Yes, we are willing to surrender. Please leave first, Miss Liuyan Ling. Ashima confirmed once again. All right, let's go. Guhan was not like the main character in a movie where he had to fight to be happy. Since he could win without fighting, what was wrong with that? Guhan was more than happy to oblige. Hence, Guhan planned to leave the room with his two companions. No, I don't want to leave like this. Suddenly, Liuyan Ling grabbed Guhan's hand and looked into Guhan's eyes. I can't win like this, especially when the opponent is a B** starred from Jerusalem. All right. It took Guhan less than a second to complete his thought process. He was able to win without fighting because of Liuyan Ling. Since Liuyan Ling did not want to win in this way, he would use absolute strength to clear the path for himself. Sigh, after all this time, it was still the main character's plot. Chapter 389. Ashma was not surprised to hear that Fleeting Time Rin had chosen to fight instead of winning the battle that was already within his grasp. It would be a miracle if Liuyan Ling would accept such a victory. The people of the Liuyan family would never accept such a victory, not to mention a victory from the Jerusalemites. The entire room seemed to have elongated out of thin air as both sides confirmed that they were ready for the battle. It turned into a large arena that was 100 meters by 100 meters. There was a red circle on each of the diagonal of the arena. This was the starting point of the battle. The swordsmen of both sides had to start the battle from this position. Guhan, I hope that you and Ifei will not fight later. I will handle these 3 battles alone, Liuyan Ling said to Guhan in the preparation area. She looked very determined. Liuyan Ling, are you kidding me? How can you handle 3 people alone? Song Ifei did not believe that Liuyan Ling could handle 3 opponents by herself. It's nothing. For the descendants of the Liuyan family, even if there are 30 or 300 of them, they will still be defeated by us, let alone 3 people. These words might sound like bragging, but when they came out of Liuyan Ling's mouth, it felt like it was the truth. Guhan could only shrug at Liuyan Ling's insistence and smile. Hurry up, I still have to rush back to Yuzhang City. Okay, I will get rid of them quickly. Liuyan Ling's words were full of confidence. On the other side, Ashima's 2 teammates were beside Ashima, listening to Ashima's instructions. The more they listened, the more serious their expressions became. It seemed like Ashma had prepared a sumptuous dinner for Liuyan Ling. Ibrahim, according to our agreement, you will fight the first battle. As the preparation time was over, the Saintess gave an order. A white-robed swordsman standing beside her nodded and leaped into the red circle. At the same time, Liuyan Ling also walked into the red circle that belonged to her. At this time, the 2 of them were about 140 meters apart. This distance was enough for a sword wielder to release the sword mistress, prepare their skills, and run for their lives. Ready, 3, 2, 1. Begin. The male version of Heaven encompassing Gendi's voice reverberated throughout the room. As soon as he finished speaking, the 2 of them began their battle at the same time. Almighty Allah above, please witness the magnificent battle of your most loyal servant, Ibrahim. Release yourself. Sword Maiden shredded leaves. After he finished reciting his lines, Ibrahim released his Sword Maiden. Sword Maiden. His Sword Maiden is a treasured sword grade Sword Maiden, broken leaves. As he observed the situation on the battlefield, Guhan began to search for information on the broken leaves sword in his mind. Very quickly, most of the information on this sword maiden appeared before Guhan. Now that he thought about it, the broken leaves sword was related to a tragic period of ancient Huaxia's history. In the middle period of the Tang dynasty, a not-so-famous but far-reaching battle had taken place near Suaya, the Battle of Talas. This was a major battle between the Great Tang Empire, which occupied the east, and the Arab Empire, which had emerged from the three continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe. In this battle, the Great Tang had 18,000 soldiers against the Arab Empire's 80,000. Although the Great Tang soldiers fought valiantly, with a casualty rate of 1:3, the total number of soldiers participating in the battle was only 1/5 that of the Arab Empire, and in the rear of the Arab Empire, there were still 200,000 cavalry ready to move. Thus, in this battle, the Great Tang lost Suaya village, an important stronghold of the Anxi Protectorate, and China's expansion into Central Asia was pushed back. As the victor, the Arab Empire's General Ziyad ibn Suli, in order to celebrate this victory, named the sword of Great Tang General Go Sionji, which he had seized from the battlefield, the Arab Empire's General Ziyad ibn Suli, and he wore it day and night to humiliate the Great Tang and show off his victory. Unfortunately, Ziyad ibn Suli had never imagined that the Leaf Shatterer sword would become his sword of death. His superior had been executed by the Caliph because of his achievements, and he was imprisoned. In the end, he was ordered to commit suicide, dying under the Leaf Shatterer sword. This broken leaves sword became the spoils of war of the Arab Empire and was kept by the imperial family. Later on, after passing through many places, it finally blossomed with a dazzling light after the apocalypse, becoming a treasured sword-grade sword maiden. Because the broken leaves sword had experienced the defeat of two unparalleled generals and killed Ziyad ibn Suli, it eventually became a sword maiden of the path of slaughter. Its skills were all skills that could raise one's attack to the limit. After the broken leaves sword was released, a young lady dressed in an Arab dress appeared. Be it her clothes or accessories, they were all standard Arabian style. However, if one were to look closely at the face of this sword maiden, one would realize that the appearance of the broken leaves sword was that of a traditional Eastern lady. Her face was delicate, her skin was fair, her eyes were small, and her fair arms were hidden beneath the translucent dress. She looked extremely alluring. If one were to take a few more glances, one would soon realize that this broken leaves sword's appearance was more similar to that of a Korean woman. This was because Go Sionji wasn't a citizen of Great Tang, but a Gogurian from Liaodong. It was said that he was a descendant of the Gogurian royal family. After Emperor Gaozong of Tang destroyed Goguryeo, Go Sionji followed his father to Great Tang. After a long journey, he eventually became one of the most outstanding generals in Great Tang. The broken leaves sword was a sword that Go Sionji had specially hired a skilled craftsman to forge. It was custom-made for him, so it was only natural that he looked similar to a Korean. After Ibrahim released the broken leaves sword as quickly as possible, he finally had the time to pay attention to his opponent, the direct descendant of the famous Liunyan clan, Liunyan Ling's movements. In the end, Ibrahim's pupils shrank the moment he saw the other party's movements. This woman actually did not release her sword lady. Instead, she directly held a crimson sword lady and charged toward him. Broken leaves sword, block her. No, turn invisible immediately. Seeing Liunyan Ling charging at him, Ibrahim instinctively wanted to use the broken leaves sword to protect him. But at this moment, he suddenly recalled Ashima's instructions to him. He immediately gave up on his previous order and had the broken leaves sword turn invisible. Invisibility was the basic ability of every sword maiden. As an assassin, invisibility was a basic skill that they had to grasp. So, Liunyan Ling wasn't surprised to see the broken leaves sword vanish into thin air. The Liunyan clan had an ultimate move to deal with the sword maiden of the path of slaughter, or rather, the invisible Yuan Ku. The pores on Liunyan Ling's skin began to emit strands of faint sword qi. There were several hundred strands of sword qi. These strands of sword qi revolved around Liunyan Ling. As long as an invisible person tried to get close to Liunyan Ling, the sword qi would immediately sense their location, catching Liunyan Ling off guard. This was the ultimate move that the Liu clan used to deal with the invisible Yuan Ku. Countless invisible Yuan Ku had died to this move. It was precisely because this move was too effective against the invisible Yuan Ku that it was very difficult to master. In order to master this move, one had to grasp the sword chi thread technique. Splitting a ferocious and indestructible strand of sword chi into several hundred weak but tough threads. Just from the sound of it, one could tell how painful it was to master this technique. Back then, Liuyan Ling had spent 3 whole years and suffered a lot before she managed to master this move with the help of the various seniors of the Liuyan clan. Sword chi thread. As an expert swordsman, Guhan was able to immediately understand the move that Liuyan Ling was using. However, that was it. Guhan himself could not use the move. The 9 swords of Black Heaven did not have the sword chi thread technique, and Guhan was not talented enough to master it. These were all moves that had been passed down through the accumulation of countless martial arts predecessors. Without enough experience, it was impossible to comprehend these methods. Guhan could not help but re-evaluate the difference in strength between him and Liuyan Ling when he saw the sword chi thread. Guhan had initially thought that he was superior to Liuyan Ling in terms of swordsmanship. But after witnessing the sword chi thread, Guhan began to doubt his judgment. Perhaps Liuyan Ling has the ability to defeat me. Guhan began to think about other things. He no longer cared about the battle in the arena. There was really nothing for him to care about. If Fleeting Time Rin could not even deal with such a small fry, then the Fleeting Time family's reputation would be ruined. He would find a red packet to cover his face, lest he embarrassed the Fleeting Time family. Strange. Has the Leafbreaker discovered our sword chi thread? Why hasn't she ambushed me yet? I'm almost at her sword wielder. Fleeting Time thought to himself as he sprinted away from Yi Ci. Fleeting Time Ling had exposed more than 10 openings to the Leaf Shatterer as she charged towards Ibrahim, hoping that he would be able to attack her. However, the Leafbreaker did not appear. Even when Liuyan Ling was less than 10 meters away from Ibrahim, the Leafbreaker continued to hide in an unknown location. Since you're not coming out, I'll force you out. Liuyan Ling's plan was simple. The Sword Maiden had to protect the wielder. If the wielder was in danger of being injured, the Sword Maiden would have to appear to save him. If the wielder died, the Sword Maiden would fall back into a deep slumber. Ibrahim panted heavily as he watched Fleeting Time's blade approach his abdomen. His legs trembled, and it was evident that he was very afraid of Fleeting Time's attack. However, he still chose to reject Fragmented Leaf Sword's request for the 5th time in an attempt to save Ibrahim. He's not dodging at all. The Leafbreaker was less than a meter away from Liuyan Ling's abdomen. It was as if he was going to let Liuyan Ling stab him. His abnormal behavior alerted Liuyan Ling. She could sense that Fleeting Time was plotting against her. Chapter 390. You've got guts, but it's a pity that you don't have a brain, Liuyan Ling sneered. She casually swung the Yixian sword in her hand and stabbed Ibrahim. Huge ripples instantly appeared on Ibrahim's personal shield, and cracks extended outwards from the middle. This meant that Ibrahim's personal shield had less than 20% of its energy left. Liuyan Ling had only used one strike to break through more than 80% of the personal shield of an opponent of the same level. This was truly a terrifying figure, so powerful. Is this the strength of the successor of the world's #1 family? Ashma, who had witnessed the strike from outside the arena, could not help but mutter to herself. In a battle between sword-bearers of the same level, it would take at least 10 strikes to reduce the energy of the opponent's personal shield to less than 20%, even if the strike was aimed at the opponent's vitals. Moreover, this was between 2 sword-bearers with similar sword elements. As far as Ashma knew, Liuyan Ling's innate sword element was not outstanding among the direct descendants of the Liuyan family. It should be around 1,500 quarks. She had just turned 18 a month ago, and she had been trapped in this trial formation for 2 weeks. Even if she had been fighting Yuan Shen with all her might for the past half a month and absorbing their sword essences, it was impossible for her sword essence's value to exceed 3,000 quarks. However, Ibrahim had already been a treasure sword bearer for more than 2 years. When he returned to Lengthen 5 days ago, His sword element had already reached 10,460 quarks. Originally, he was going to coordinate with the famed sword-rank sword lady on the same day, but after hearing about the trial formation, he gave up on the idea of obtaining a famed sword-rank sword lady and came to the trial formation. After all, this formation only allowed sword-bearers who were at the level of treasured swords to enter. If Ibrahim were to succeed, he would lose the chance to enter the formation. Therefore, the sword element in Ibrahim's body should be more than 2 times more than Liuan Ling's, and his personal shield should be more than 3 times thicker than Liuan Ling's. This was no longer a contest of orders of magnitude, but why? Why could Liuan Ling destroy 80% of Ibrahim's shield energy with a single strike? What exactly happened? Wait, the sword lady in Liuan Ling's hand was not a treasure sword. At this moment, Ashma finally realized that the sword lady in Liuan Ling's hand was different. The scarlet sword lady in Liuan Ling's hand seemed to be the legendary Yixian sword. It's actually the Yixian sword. The Yixian sword has actually appeared again. A hint of panic flashed through Ashma's eyes under the veil. The sword in Liuan Ling's hand was actually the Yixian sword. Hadn't that sword been destroyed by the Liuan clan's ancestor? Why had it appeared again? If it's the Yixian sword, then everything can be explained. After all, the Yixian sword is the Liuan clan's origin sword. That was what Ashma thought. However, the situation on the battlefield changed drastically again. When Liuan Ling easily destroyed 80% of Ibrahim's shield energy, the sword chi network around Liuan Ling's body moved. Someone was approaching Liuan Ling at high speed. You're finally not a coward anymore? The only one who could approach Liuan Ling was naturally Ibrahim's Leafbreaker. The sword lady could no longer watch her wielder get attacked by Liuan Ling like this. She circled to Liuan Ling's back and attempted to assassinate Liuan Ling. Liuan Ling naturally wouldn't let the Leafbreaker's plan succeed. The moment she sensed the Leafbreaker, she was already prepared to counterattack. Her blade was no longer aimed at Ibrahim. Instead, she swung her hand horizontally and slashed at an empty spot in the void. Even though she couldn't see the Leafbreaker's movements, Liuan Ling was certain that the Leafbreaker's body would definitely appear there. She had no other choice. Liuan Ling, don't forget that I'm still here. Ibrahim suddenly shouted and lunged forward, using his body to charge at Liuan Ling's Yixian sword. You're courting death. Liuan Ling was shocked by Ibrahim's actions. Liuan Ling didn't expect Ibrahim to use his body to disrupt her sword technique and deliver himself to her blade. A series of ripples could be seen with the naked eye as Ibrahim's personal shield shattered. Without the shield's obstruction, the Yixian sword easily stabbed into Ibrahim's body. His robe was immediately stained with his blood and his white robe was instantly dyed red. Oh no, I'm in trouble. The moment her sword pierced Ibrahim's body, Liuan Ling realized that she was in trouble. Even though Ibrahim was stabbed by the Yixian sword, not only did he not try to break away from the sword, but he even let the sword sink deeper into his body. What was even more unbelievable was that Ibrahim didn't seem to want Liuan Ling to pull the Yixian sword out of his body at all. He had also attached all the sword essence in his body to the part of the blade that was embedded in his body, so that his skin and flesh would stick to the Yixian sword. That way, if Liuan Ling wanted to pull the Yixian sword out, she would have to use her sword aura to disperse the sword essence attached to the blade. It wasn't much trouble for Liuan Ling, but in a way, it was a huge problem. If Liuan Ling used her sword aura to forcefully pull the Yixian sword out, the sword aura that was sharper than steel would definitely cause irreparable damage to Ibrahim's body. If she didn't control the strength of the sword aura well, Ibrahim's internal organs might be minced into a pile of minced meat by Liuan Ling. Such injuries could not be healed by ordinary medical pods, so Ibrahim could only die. However, it was impossible for Fleeting Time Ling to kill Ibrahim in a duel. The reputation of the Fleeting Time family would be in grave danger if Ashima were to announce this to the public. Even though Ibrahim was courting death, the angry netizens would not care about the truth. They would only see the second generation of the Fleeting Time family. No, the second generation of the Fleeting Time family. They would only see that the second generation of the Fleeting Time family had used their family's power to commit crimes and kill their comrades. They were the scum of humanity. From a certain point of view, The more pathetic the netizens were, the less they needed to think about the bigger picture. All they needed to do was to curse. It was impossible for Liu Ling to kill Ibrahim. Even someone as strong as Liu Ling was helpless in a situation like this. Liu Ling's helplessness was an opportunity for the Sword Maiden. The Leaf Shatterer finally appeared behind Liu Ling, and stabbed at Liu Ling's neck with the Leaf Shatterer. The shield around Liu Ling began to ripple. Just like Ibrahim, 80% of the shield's energy was instantly depleted. The Liu Nian family was strong because of their sword techniques, their various sword techniques, and their dodging techniques. They were strong because they could only hit you, but you couldn't hit me. But when it came to personal shields, the Liu Nian family, or rather, almost all of the aristocratic families used the same method as ordinary swordbearers. They used the amount of sword essence in their bodies multiplied by the Sword Maiden's defense to obtain a personal shield with a maximum energy limit. The amount of damage the Leaf Shatterer dealt to Liu Ling was equivalent to the amount of energy lost to the shield. While there was no accurate figure for the amount of energy a Sword Maiden could store in real life, the energy of a shield in the game was calculated strictly according to the data in real life. That was why the Sword Maiden's data in the game was not too different from the data in real life. Liu Ling's shield did not have a lot of energy. She only had less than 3,000 sword essences in her body, and the leisurely celestial sword was ranked first among the ancient Sword Maidens. However, the leisurely celestial sword's strength lay in her skills. Her 3 basic attributes were only above average among the ancient Sword Maidens, and she could not even make it into the top 100. Her defense ratio was only around 0.1, which was equivalent to 300 points of shield energy. Such a small amount of shield energy was even lower than that of a normal Sword Maiden wielding a Sword Maiden. Ibrahim's Leaf Shatterer was ranked in the middle among the Sword Maidens, but she was a Sword Maiden of the Path of Slaughter. Her damage was the highest among the Sword Maidens. More importantly, the Leaf Shatterer immediately used her ultimate skill when she attacked Liu Ling. Leaf Assault. At the cost of sacrificing all of the shield's energy, the user's attack deals damage equal to the shield's energy. Just by looking at the skill description, one could tell how terrifying the damage of this skill was. It was even possible to kill a Tiger-class Yuan Ku with a single hit. If Liu Ling's sword was not stuck in Ibrahim's body, the Leaf Shatterer would not have been able to hit Liu Ling. However, that was only an if. In reality, Liu Ling could only rely on her shield and a secret skill of the Fleeting Time family to withstand the damage. As a result, the energy of Liu Ling's shield was depleted, and it could collapse at any time. Scram! Liu Ling's face was filled with rage after being tricked. However, she calmed down. Liu Ling let go of the flowing celestial sword in her hand, leaving it in Ibrahim's body. She then rolled backwards and pulled out the second Sword Maiden, the Heaven Inquiring Sword. Initially, Fleeting Time Ling did not want to use the SkyQuest sword. The sword's blade was covered in cracks, and it was very likely that it would use up the last point of its durability if he were to fight an enemy. However, the flowing celestial sword was stuck in Ibrahim's body, and her shield was in danger. Liu Ling had no choice but to pull out the Heaven Inquiring Sword. However, Liu Ling was confident that she could end the battle without causing any damage to the Heaven Inquiring Sword. Heaven Inquiring Sword. Ashma's eyes lit up, and she immediately said something to Ibrahim, who was still bleeding on the stage. When Ibrahim heard what Ashma said, his pained face immediately relaxed. He raised his hand, and before Liu Ling could attack again, he said, "I admit defeat. I've lost." Chapter 391. Let me do it. Guhan whispered to Liu Ling as soon as the battle was over. Liu Ling's shield had less than 10% of its energy left, which was a very dangerous situation. Once Liu Ling's shield broke, Liu Ling would be in danger of suffering physical injuries. Although she could be healed after lying down for a while in the med bay, the pain brought about by injuries was not something a girl should bear. However, it was obvious that Liu Ling would not agree to let Guhan fight in her place. Unless Liu Ling was so severely injured that she could not fight, Liu Ling would not back down. This was the destiny of the direct descendant of the world's #1 aristocratic family. On the other side, Ibrahim was sent to the med bay by his friend after he pulled out the Yizyan sword. His injuries were not light. Many of his internal organs and blood vessels were ruptured. If he did not enter the med bay, he would die in the ring in a few minutes. After Ibrahim was placed in the med bay, another white-robed swordsman jumped into the ring without hesitation. He pointed his sword at Liuyan Ling's nose and said proudly, "Miss Liuyan Ling, I, Abdul, would like to learn from you. This Jerusalemite is a little unkind." Guhan shook his head in disdain when he saw his next opponent challenging Liuyan Ling. His impression of Jerusalemite had plummeted. Generally speaking, when two swordbearers fought against each other, the side with more people would take the initiative to set aside a certain amount of time for the lone swordbearer to recover some of the energy of his personal shield. There was no written rule, but everyone agreed that it was around 3 minutes. 3 minutes was enough for the sword maiden to recover 20% of her shield's energy. But the Jerusalem swordbearers had completely ignored this unspoken rule. Another swordbearer had already challenged Fleeting Time Ling to a duel in less than a minute. Cracks could still be seen on Fleeting Time Ling's shield, which meant that the shield was still within the 20% danger zone. Then Guhan, "Will Liuyan Ling be alright?" Song Ifei could tell that Liuyan Ling was not in a good condition. She had already depleted 80% of her shield's energy when she fought the white-robed swordsman. If the swordsman were to fight again, Liuyan Ling's shield would be destroyed. Would she have to endure the damage with her own body? "I didn't expect you to be worried about Ling." Guhan was shocked when he saw Song Ifei's worried expression. "Aren't the two girls fighting each other? Why do I suddenly feel like they're best friends?" "TSK, the fight between me and Liuyan Ling is an internal conflict between humans. We need to fight against these annoying Jerusalemites. Do you understand?" Song Ifei stuck out his tongue and said. He didn't expect this girl to know the famous words of the founder of the last dynasty before the Great Calamity. However, this dynasty had the most relics, and they had left the most culture for the modern world. It was not surprising that Song Ifei knew the famous words of the founder. "Liuyan Ling will be fine," said Guhan with a smile as he looked at Fleeting Time, who was wiping the blood off his Yizyan. "Have you noticed? Ling is angry." An angry heir of the Fleeting Time family is not someone that can be trifled with. "Get ready in 3, 2, 1. Begin." The male version of the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor's voice resounded throughout the room. As soon as the voice fell, Abdul did not say anything else and immediately began to release his treasured sword, the Sword of Maximilian. The Sword of Maximilian was the sword of the Holy Roman Emperor, Maximilian I. The Holy Roman Emperor, the founder of the Second German Empire, had outstanding martial arts throughout his life, developing the people's livelihood, and laying a solid foundation for the Second German Empire to be able to challenge the whole world. Before the Great Calamity, the Sword of Maximilian had been kept in the German Museum. It was unknown how it had ended up in the hands of the city of Jerusalem, being kept in the Sword Pavilion in Jerusalem. During the heyday of the Green Sect, the Arabian Empire favored swords, and the Arabian scimitar was famous throughout the world. On the other hand, the Arabian people didn't like using swords. There weren't many famous swords in the Arabian region that could be passed down from generation to generation. Therefore, most of the sword maidens in Jerusalem's Sword Pavilion were famous swords obtained from other regions. For example, Berlin had repeatedly negotiated with Jerusalem, hoping to exchange for the Sword of Maximilian from the German Empire at a certain price, but Jerusalem had rejected every single one of their offers. The Sword of Maximilian was a curved sword that resembled a crescent moon. The girl after his liberation was also a girl as bright and beautiful as the moonlight. She wore golden armor and had golden hair. There was also an ahoge on her head that stood up. Upon closer inspection, Ji Yuhan could actually see a trace of Artoria's shadow in her. Abdul's mind kept recalling Ashima's instructions. Liuyan Ling's personal shield is about to collapse. As long as you can break it, I will be able to shatter the pride of the young lady of the Liuyan family. I will make her understand that our great Allah is the supreme existence in the world. Even her ancestor, the Kunzu, was only a servant of our Allah. But we won't use the same trick again. The Liuyan family won't fall for it a second time if we use Ibrahim's method of exchanging injury for injury. She will definitely use the most vicious sword technique to deal with you. This is the key to our victory. Later, you will let Maximilian do this. Abdul felt his balls ache at the thought of this. The Saintess was indeed a masterful strategist. Abdul believed that fleeting time would definitely fall for the Saintess trap. But wouldn't that be a little too much of a price to pay? Ibrahim was already in the medical bay, and Abdul's problem was probably not something that could be solved by entering the medical bay. Although Abdullah was extremely unwilling in his heart, he, who had been deeply educated by the New Green sect, was powerless and had no intention to oppose the Saintess's intention in battle. He could only carry a fearless spirit and begin this battle that was destined to doom him. Maximilian did not rush to attack like he did with the Leaf Shatterer. Instead, he stood still and threw a circle of light at himself every few seconds. Every time he threw a circle of light, he could feel Maximilian's personal shield grow a little heavier. This is Maximilian's advanced skill, the Sacred Angel's Whisper. It can be stacked a total of 8 times, and each stack will increase the personal shield's energy by 10%. Guhan retrieved Maximilian's information from his personal terminal instead of his own memory. There were tens of thousands of sword maidens in the world, and it was impossible for Guhan to remember all of them. Maximilian's sword was not a powerful sword maiden among the treasured sword maidens. It was ranked in the middle, and it was a Western sword maiden, so this sword maiden had not entered Guhan's memory. Guhan carefully read all the information about this sword maiden and found that all 4 of her skills were related to defense. She was the most thorough and orthodox defensive sword maiden. This kind of sword maiden could protect her teammates in a team battle and create an environment for the other sword maidens to attack. This kind of meat shield sword maiden had the ability to change the entire situation in a team battle. But in a one-on-one battle, this kind of sword maiden was very weak. No matter how high her defense was, Liuyan Ling could still grind her to death. Moreover, Liuyan Ling did not intend to grind her to death. Liuyan Ling stretched out a finger and lightly flicked the blade of the Yixian sword, as if flicking a melon in the head. The tip of the Yixian sword shot out a ray of light. The ray was actually a sword aura, but it was not like Guhan's sword aura, which existed in the form of a sword aura slash. Instead, it hovered in the air and condensed into the shape of a sword. The sword aura used by normal sword wielders, such as Guhan's, was sharp and purely used to slash. It was the kind of sword aura that dragged a long tail on the ground as seen in anime. This was a normal sword aura. Generally speaking, such sword aura could only be seen in the form of a gas. If it lasted too long in the air or attacked an enemy, it would dissipate and become ordinary air. But Liuyan Ling's sword aura was different. Her sword aura flew out of the Yixian sword one after another, and to the naked eye, it did not look like a gas at all. Instead, it looked like a solid sword, as if it was a replica of the Yixian sword. What was more shocking was that the first sword aura that appeared had lasted in the air for more than a minute, but it showed no signs of dissipating at all. In fact, it was even more solid than when it first appeared. For a whole 3 minutes, both sides did not engage each other. Instead, they were constantly preparing their skills. Maximilian kept casting Holy Angel's Whispers on herself. After stacking the skill 8 times, the energy of her personal shield had reached 15 times, and her resistance to attacks increased exponentially. On the other side, 10 solid swords of light appeared beside fleeting Time Ling. Each of the swords of light emitted an aura that struck fear into the hearts of his opponents. This is the 100 million sword technique of the Liuyan clan. Ashma's voice trembled when he saw the light swords. The 100 million sword technique of the Liuyan clan was famous for its power. It was known as the best sword technique in the world. It was a sword technique that made every Yuan coup and every sword wielder despair. It was a legend that lasted for 1,000 years. But now, this legend was going to be broken by Ashma. The direct descendant of the Liuyan clan was going to be defeated by the Supreme Saintess. Long live Allah! Ashma prayed sincerely for the first time. Chapter 392. The 100 million sword art was a secret technique of the Liuyan clan. It was the most powerful sword art in the world, and it was what the Kanzu calendar relied on to dominate the world. Countless honors were attributed to the 100 million sword art. Whenever people mentioned the Liu Nian clan, they would automatically think of the 100 million sword art. They would sigh. If only 10% of swordbearers knew the 100 million sword art, then Yuan Ku would have been killed by humans long ago. Some scoundrels would come out and criticize the Liu Nian clan. Why didn't they publicize the 100 million sword art for all swordbearers to cultivate? Wouldn't the world be at peace then? The Liu Nian clan was a bunch of shameless people who were stingy for the sake of their own status. The people who would say such things were probably idiots who had never been educated. It was clearly written in the history textbooks that in the 100 years after the Great Destruction, both the Sword Ancestor calendar and the 2 generations of the Sword Ancestors' descendants had selflessly offered the 100 million sword art to the general public in an attempt to let them learn the 100 million sword art and save the human race. However, the reality was tragic. Apart from those who had the Liu Nian calendar's bloodline, no one else could learn the 100 million sword art. Whether it was an ordinary person, a sword-bearer, or a talented sword immortal like Jendi, they couldn't cultivate the 100 million sword art as long as they didn't have the Liu Nian clan's bloodline. It was as if it was made for the Liu Nian clan. Even Zhetian Jendi didn't say anything after studying the 100 million sword art. He turned around and left, never mentioning the 100 million sword art again. Obviously, even Zhetian Jendi couldn't cultivate this peerless technique passed down by the Kanzu calendar. Moreover, the Liu Nian clan had a requirement for the Liu Nian clan's bloodline. Once it was lower than a certain threshold, even someone from the Liu Nian clan wouldn't be able to cultivate the 100 million sword art. Furthermore, the Liu Nian clan had a thin bloodline. Most of the time, they only had one descendant. Therefore, there were no more than 3 people in the Liu Nian clan who could cultivate the 100 million sword art. There was once an incident that caused the Liu Nian clan to lose face. One of the successors of the Liu Nian clan lived to the age of 24, but he could not cultivate the billion sword art. At first, all the elders and officials of the Liu Nian family were terrified. Had the Liu Nian family's bloodline become so thin? Could it be that the myriad sword technique would no longer exist in the world? That would be a huge disaster for mankind. The father of this direct descendant, the family leader of the Liu Nian family, had been depressed because of this matter. He had desperately drunk himself to the point where his corpse was lying on the ground. A female swordsman passing by had picked it up and given it a good beating. When he woke up the next day, the patriarch found out about this ridiculous matter and left the female swordsman with an ashen face. He was a man famous for loving his wife. Apart from his wife, he had never touched any other woman. He was the perfect model of a good man. In the end, 10 months later, the female swordsman came with a child. She said that the child was the son of the patriarch of the Liu Nian family and had to be raised by the Liu Nian family. In a short period of time, this became the biggest news in Yangjing City. Rumors and guesses about the Liu Nian family, as well as the quarrel between the Liu Nian family's madam and the female swordsman, occupied the headlines for an entire month. After a paternity test, it was confirmed that the boy was indeed the son of the Liu Nian family, so the boy stayed in the Liu Nian family. However, the patriarch of the Liu Nian family did not like him. This was because he loved his wife and his reputation. He felt that the boy was a stain on his life. As a result, although the boy had not been mistreated, he had been greatly suppressed. From the time he was born until he was 18, he had not cultivated a single technique from the Liu Nian family. He had not received any resources from the Liu Nian family. What he had received was not even as much as a servant. Things took a turn for the better when he was 18. Although his father was unwilling, according to the rules of the Sword Council, the boy was given the opportunity to synchronize with an ancient sword. On his birthday, he successfully synchronized with the symbol of the Liu Nian family, the Yixian sword. The boy's actions attracted the attention of the entire Liu Nian family. The fact that he could synchronize with the Yixian sword meant that the boy's bloodline was very thick. At the very least, it was much thicker than his older brother's bloodline, who was already 42 years old but was still a treasure sword wielder. Gradually, the Liu Nian family began to call for the boy to join the Liu Nian family. However, these calls were suppressed by his father and stepmother. Although he had become an ancient sword wielder and obtained the Yixian sword, the boy still could not obtain anything from the Liuyan family. Although he had become an ancient sword wielder and obtained the Yixian sword, the boy still could not obtain anything from the Liuyan family. As a result, the boy became angry. He decided to leave the Liuyan family and break all ties with the man who treated him like dirt. He would go out on his own and establish a family that was even stronger than the Liuyan family. According to the following development, the young master of the Liuyan family should have had many fortuitous encounters and made many powerful friends. In the end, he would become an emperor sword wielder and proudly return to the family to humiliate his father, who treated him like dirt. Unfortunately, the plot did not develop like that. When the boy packed his things and planned to go out on his own, the Liuyan family's mountain gate was breached. A furious Gendi slaughtered his way from the mountain gate to the center of the Liuyan family. He killed all the elders of the Liuyan family, and all the servants were crippled. Gendi had killed 80% of the Liuyan family's combat power. At this moment, the boy's father, who was also the patriarch, came out to take a look and was instantly scared speechless. This sword emperor was none other than the female sword-bearer who had picked him up when he was drunk and had sex with him before giving birth to his second son. This female sword-bearer had actually become a sword emperor-level sword-bearer. What made the patriarch deeply ashamed was that he was only a spirit sword-level sword-bearer. This Gendi immediately asked the man who had once been with her why he had treated her son like this. Back then, she had felt that the Liuyan family would be able to raise her son better, which was why she had reluctantly given him to the Liuyan family. Now, her son had been a cripple for 18 years and had been raised as a pig for 18 years. No wonder this Gendi had come all the way from the mountain gate to slap the Liuyan family's face. As such, the boy's mother requested that the Liuyan family raise her son as the next family leader. All the resources, secret techniques, and sword techniques had to be passed on to her son. However, the family leader was quite stubborn and did not agree. He said that he would never acknowledge this second son. He would only acknowledge the eldest son that he had with his beloved. The Liuyan family would definitely be passed on to his eldest son. This completely infuriated Gendi. He wreaked havoc in the Liuyan family again, forcing out two of the family's old retainers. These two old retainers were said to have fought alongside Kunzu. Their seniority and prestige in the Liuyan family were frighteningly high. They normally did not come out, but this Gendi had wreaked too much havoc. He had almost damaged the Liuyan family's bloodline, so these two old retainers had no choice but to come out. As such, these two old retainers started to mediate. They first fiercely scolded the family leader, saying that the Liuyan family should treat everyone equally. Since he was a direct descendant of the Liuyan family, he had the right to learn the Liuyan family's techniques. Afterwards, they called over the family leader's two sons and had them compete. Whoever won would become the family leader's successor. At this point, everyone could tell that these two old retainers were siding with the family leader. This was because the second son had only just become an ancient sword-tier sword wielder, while the eldest son had been a treasure sword-tier sword wielder for more than 20 years. He had also learned the Liuyan family's peak sword techniques and secret techniques. No matter what, the eldest son should have been the winner, not the second son who knew nothing. In the end, something laughable happened. In less than 3 minutes, the eldest son was beaten to the ground by the second son, and he was covered with injuries. No one had expected that the second son had actually mastered the 100 million sword art. This was because the 100 million sword art could only be cultivated by descendants of the Liuyan family with a high enough bloodline. As such, even though the 100 million sword art was incredibly powerful, the Liuyan family had no intention of keeping it a secret. They placed the stone stele with the 100 million sword art in the main hall so that everyone could see it and study it. This was the only sword technique that the second son could cultivate. Seeing that their second son had actually mastered the 100 million sword art, the two old retainers immediately changed their minds and fully supported their second son to become the next family leader. What a joke! If the next leader of the Liuyan family could not even learn the billion sword technique, how could he be the leader of the Liuyan family? The Liuyan family would become a complete joke. This naturally caused the family leader to retaliate. He loved his wife too much. Even though he knew that his second son was the most suitable candidate, he still insisted on making his eldest son the successor. This idiot even used his own position to threaten him. He said that if he wanted to make his second son the successor, then he would even take away his position as the family head. He would never bow his head. He believed that true love was invincible. Unfortunately, while he believed that true love was invincible, it didn't mean that the two old men believed that true love was invincible. Furthermore, his second son had a sword the arch as his mother. This was an important connection for the Liu Nian clan. As a result, the two old antiques had called a family meeting to expel the patriarch that very day. Afterward, the second son had been promoted to the position of patriarch, and the second son had become the youngest patriarch in the history of the Liu Nian family. Then, the second son, who had inexplicably become the head of the family, announced his first order, which was to capture the eldest son and his father. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't stupid enough to take revenge on his biological father at this time. He just forcibly extracted the blood of the two people, and then went to do a paternity test. As a result, the greatest joke in the history of the Liu Nian family was born. The eldest son, whom the family leader had protected so much, and whom he had risked his position to protect, was actually not a child of the Liu Nian family, but a bastard child of the family leader's wife and next-door neighbor, Old Wang. Furthermore, the two of them had been in an adulterous relationship for more than 40 years. A few days before Jendi had attacked, the two of them had even had sex and dreamed about the beautiful future of the Liu Nian family becoming the Old Wang family. Needless to say, the two adulterers were torn to shreds by the enraged old antique, while the eldest son was chased out of the Lionian clan. As for the patriarch who had almost ended the Lionian clan's legacy, he was locked up in the ancestral land forever to reflect on his mistakes. In fact, he didn't need to be locked up. The moment he found out the truth, he went crazy. The Liu Nian family did everything they could to cover it up, even erasing the family leader's name from their genealogy and treating him as if he didn't exist. But they still couldn't stop this joke from spreading throughout the human world, and even Yuan Ku's side learned about it. After that, the Liu Nian family set up a new rule. In any case, the heir of the family leader had to learn the myriad sword art, and anyone who couldn't could do a paternity test. Right, there was one more thing to explain. This female Gendi's title was Bloodhuan Gendi, and her son later became the fourth Gendi of the Liu Nian family, Zhouli Gendi. They were the only mother and son pair in history who had fought against the Sword Emperor. The eldest son, who had been chased out of the family, had a beautiful daughter, who later married an immortal sword wielder and gave birth to a daughter. After many years, this daughter grew up and became the famous Ming Yuan Gendi. There was nothing more interesting in the world than this. Chapter 393. Miss Lionian Ling, don't you think it's a bit too much to use the billion swords technique against an ordinary sword wielder? Ashma, who was wearing a veil, said angrily. Indeed, using the billion swords technique was a bit too much. Since when do I, Lionian Ling, need you Jerusalemites to meddle in my affairs? Lionian Ling sneered. The 10 light swords flying around her seemed to have received some kind of order. They shot out like arrows, stabbing toward Abdul. Originally, Lionian Ling did not want to use the billion swords technique against the Jerusalemites. After all, they were also sword-bearers. Although there was a huge difference in ethnic conflicts, it could not hide the fact that Jerusalemites were the backbone of humanity. However, Ibrahim's actions had completely angered Lionian Ling. He had used such a despicable move just to break through her personal shield, and he was not even willing to give Lionian Ling 3 minutes to recover. How could Lionian Ling not be angry? Therefore, Lionian Ling decided to use the billion swords technique to send Abdul away. If he knew what was good for him, he would immediately surrender. Otherwise, he would end up in a medical pod like Ibrahim. Defend. Abdul, order Maximilian to defend with all her might. She cannot dodge the attack of the billion swords technique, Ashma said loudly to Abdul. Although Abdul's forehead was dripping with sweat, Ashma did not want him to give up. Instead, she wanted him to continue fighting. Maximilian, activate the Knight's Guardian form. At Abdul's command, Sword Mistress Maximilian's helmet, which was originally open, immediately closed up. A sturdy mask that only revealed a pair of eyes extended from both sides, protecting Maximilian's entire head. At the same time, Maximilian's body shrank. Like a tortoise, she retracted all her limbs into the armor. Other than her hair, all other parts of her body were protected by the armor. Not a single part of her body was exposed. She became a steel fortress. This was Maximilian's ultimate skill, Knight's Guardian form. She used her sturdy armor to completely protect her body. The armor could withstand damage equivalent to the energy of a close-fitting shield. It was an extremely powerful defensive skill. Fool, don't you know that there is no turtle shell that our Liunyan clan cannot break? Liuyan Ling mocked him disdainfully. 10 light swords bombarded Maximilian's tortoise shell. A cloud of smoke instantly enveloped the entire battlefield, making it impossible for anyone to see what was going on inside. They only knew that after more than 10 seconds, an extremely disheveled figure rushed out of the thick smoke. The figure was none other than Maximilian. The golden armor that was as mighty as a celestial god's had become tattered. The entire hand armor was gone, while the waist and legs had been sliced open. The golden armor had also turned black, gray, and gold. All in all, this armor was basically ruined. But she had to admit that Maximilian's armor was still on her body, and that was enough. This meant that the defense of Maximilian's armor had not been broken, and Maximilian's personal shield was still intact. After discovering this, Abdul let out a deep sigh of relief. Maximilian lived up to her reputation as the sword mistress. She could actually defend against the attack of the billion swords art. It was said that although the billion swords art was extremely powerful, it consumed a lot of sword essence. He had heard from the saintess that with the little sword essence that Liuyan Ling had, she could only support 2 uses of the billion swords art at most. Right now, Maximilian had only lost the defense of the armor. Maximilian's close-fitting shield was still intact. Even if Liuyan Ling used the billion swords art again, Maximilian would still be able to withstand it. Without the sword essence, even if the opponent was the descendant of the Liuyan family, Abdul could still easily defeat him. If he could defeat the descendant of the Liuyan family, then he would definitely become the hero of Jerusalem and steal many female slaves. Thinking of this, Abdul couldn't help but become excited. Abdul, what are you thinking about? Hurry up and run. Ashima's warning woke Abdul up from his daydream. He raised his head and saw 10 light swords floating in the air again. This time, the light swords were attacking him. Chumph, you're using the billion swords art again so soon? Alright, let's see if you have the chance to use it a third time. Abdul made up his mind and ordered Maximilian through the sword mark. Maximilian, hurry up and protect me. Yes, sir. Maximilian, who was in tatters, appeared in front of Abdul in a flash. This was Maximilian's basic skill, which allowed her to flash in front of her swordsman and protect him. With Maximilian in front of her, the 10 light swords that were attacking Abdul were once again blocked by Maximilian. When all the dust settled, Maximilian's body was completely exposed. All her armor had been cut into pieces, and her youthful and beautiful body was exposed in front of everyone. Ah! Annoying. Song Ifei screamed and buried her face in Guhan's back. Thinking that something was wrong, she immediately stretched out her hand and covered Guhan's eyes. She shouted, "Shameless man, don't look. I didn't expect Liuyan Ling to be this kind of person." She actually stripped off the sword lady's clothes. You can't blame Ling. This is Maximilian's own responsibility. Guhan pushed Song Ifei's hand away and said calmly, Maximilian's ultimate skill is to use his armor as an extra shield. If he doesn't break all his armor, this extra shield will always be in front of him. Liuyan Ling will not be able to attack Maximilian's personal shield at all. If she wants to win, she must completely break Maximilian's armor. This is not Liuyan Ling's fault. Don't blame Ling wrongly. Ha 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 ha. Seeing that his sword lady was naked, Abdul not only did not help her cover up, but also jumped out excitedly. He laughed wildly and said, Miss Liuyan Ling, you have already used the billion swords technique twice. Do you still have sword essence left to use it? My Maximilian still has 40% of her shield's energy left. It's impossible for you to defeat her. To think that the descendant of the Liu Nian family would lose to me, Abdul. Allah above, your loyal servant Abdul thanks you for your kindness. Is this guy an idiot? Guhan watched Abdul's performance in a daze. Then, he directly put the idiot hat on his head. Has this guy never studied the billion sword skill? Idiot. On the other side, Ashima's face was also livid. How come she had never seen such an idiot in her subordinate? It seemed that she had to exclude him from her future circle. Such a person would definitely ruin her plans in the future. Who told you that this is the second time I've used the billion swords technique? Liuyan Ling, who was standing in front of Abdul, looked at him as if he was an idiot. Suddenly, 10 dazzling sword lights flew out from the smoke and floated in front of Abdul. They were aimed at Abdul's eyes, almost blinding him. The third time. Abdul was shocked. Liuyan Ling had used the billion swords technique for the third time. He immediately turned to Ashima and asked in panic, Lady Ashima, didn't you say that Liuyan Ling could only use the billion swords technique twice? How can she use it a third time? I'm not lying to you, Ibrahim, but this isn't the third sword ray from the billion sword technique. This is the first sword ray. Ashima said with a cold face. This is the first time. Abdul turned around in fear and muttered, Why? Why were these 10 sword lights the first sword lights? Could it be that the previous 2 attacks were fake? But my Maximilian's armor was completely shattered. Looks like you never understood our Liu Nian family's billion swords technique. Fleeting time Ling waved his hand, and the 10 sword auras blossomed like flowers. The heart of the flower was Abdul, who stood rooted to the ground. The 10 sword lights completely surrounded Abdul. As long as they moved towards the center, Abdul would be turned into a pile of minced meat. The billion swords technique's sword lights are not single-use items. She is a real sword mistress. Liuyan Ling gave Abdul one last explanation, and the 10 sword lights flew towards Abdul without hesitation. Maximilian, save me. In his panic, Abdul could only call for his sword mistress protection. Maximilian also obeyed the command and once again stood in front of Abdul to block him. The 10 sword lights continued to slash and stab at the sword mistress and the sword mistress' personal shields. In the blink of an eye, Maximilian's personal shield shattered, followed by Abdul's personal shield. In less than 5 seconds, the personal shields of the sword mistress and the sword mistress were completely destroyed. Admit defeat. If you don't, it will be your body that gets hurt. Fleeting Ling replied coldly. In a normal duel between swordsmen, the moment the swordsman's personal barrier was broken, the swordsman would be declared the loser, and the victor would not be able to harm his opponent's body. Humans could not allow the sword mistress to have a deep grudge against each other. All infighting was controlled within a certain range. Are you kidding me? How can I lose like this? Abdul grabbed Maximilian's body in front of him and used his sword mistress as a meat shield. He yelled at Ling in a frenzy, Come on, kill me if you can. Come at me if you can, scum. Since you want to die, don't blame me. Wrath burned in fleeting time Ling's eyes. 10 sword auras pierced through Maximilian's body without hesitation, and pierced through Abdul's body as if they were candied fruits on a stick. Poochie. Abdul spat out a mouthful of blood and weakly loosened his grip on Maximilian. Maximilian, on the other hand, stared blankly at his sword-bearer before turning into a beam of light. Finally, he turned into a sword covered in cracks and fell to the ground. After all, she was the one in front of Abdul, so she was the one who bore the brunt of the damage. Even though Liuyan Ling had held back, Maximilian could not withstand the damage. His durability dropped below 10%, and he reverted to his original form. At the very least, Maximilian would not be used in battle in the trial array. Chapter 394. I admit defeat. Abdul, who was lying on the ground with 4 to 5 holes in his body, was bleeding profusely and could die at any moment, but he used the last of his strength to say that he admitted defeat. Then, he was carried off the stage by Ashma and stuffed into the medical pod. With that, Ashma was the only one left on the Jerusalem side. Have a good rest. Leave the rest of the battle to me. I will definitely let Lion Ling know how powerful we, the people of Jerusalem, are, Ashma said slowly outside Ibrahim and Abdul's medical pod. Then, she pressed the rapid healing button of the medical pod, and the two white-robed sword-bearers fell into a deep sleep while being enveloped by the nutrient solution. Aya, fighting with Miss Lion Ling is such a disrespectful thing to do. After making arrangements for her two subordinates, Ashma, who was wearing a veil, jumped lightly to the center of the stage. Then, she said with a smile, Honorable Miss Lion Ling, since you are so powerful, Ashma won't stand on ceremony. Let our battle begin now. This Ashma was indeed the same as her two subordinates. Or rather, these two subordinates were just following her orders. They didn't give any time to rest and immediately started fighting with Lion Ling. They didn't care about the dignity and unspoken rules of a sword-bearer at all. Ashma, I haven't seen you for 2 years, and you've become more and more shameless. Jerusalem is indeed a good place. Lion Ling waved her hand, and the 10 sword rays that had just defeated Abdul flew back to Lion Ling's side. They began to circle around Lion Ling, but they didn't seem to have any killing intent at all. Jerusalem is not a good place. I really don't want to stay there for another second. Ashma, who had just been a loyal subject of Jerusalem, immediately changed her expression. Her tone was filled with disgust for Jerusalem. Ashma, don't tell me you tricked these two fools into the medical pod just to badmouth Jerusalem. You are the saintess of Jerusalem after all, the future prophet's successor. Is it really okay for you to eat like this and scold the chef? Lion Ling laughed. It can't be helped. The two of them have been brainwashed since they were young. If I hadn't told them that I had a way to defeat the successor of the Liu Nian clan, they wouldn't have willingly let you send them into the medical pod. Now, I can finally speak normally. Ashima snickered, which made Guhan and Song Ifei, who were standing behind Lion Ling, feel their blood run cold. Although Guhan had also sensed that the two white-robed swordsmen seemed to have deliberately injured themselves, Guhan had always believed that it was a battle plot. Ashma must have hoped to use the two cannon fodder's injuries to set up some kind of trap. There must be some hidden killing move against Lion Ling. However, Guhan had never thought that this was actually a method for Ashma to communicate with Lion Ling normally. Her actions and words just now were just to trick her two white-robed companions into the medical pod. Long time no see, my good sister. No one knew what Ashma's expression was under the veil. She opened her arms excitedly and quickly walked over to Lion Ling. Long time no see, my good sister. Lion Ling also smiled, and a few drops of tears actually flowed out of her eyes. With a snap of her fingers, she recalled the 10 sword gleams in the air back into the Yixian sword. She also opened her arms and hugged Ashma. The two of them were actually playing a show of deep sisterly love. Song Ifei, who was watching below the stage, was dumbfounded. Could the plot twist like this? The two of them hugged for a long time, about 10 minutes without separating. Don't get me wrong, this pair of good sisters did not have lesbian tendencies. They just hugged each other and spoke in a very low voice that only the two of them could hear, and this went on for more than 10 minutes. This was considered concise and to the point. Under normal circumstances, a pair of good sisters who had not seen each other for 2 years would at least talk for a day. Even if that was the case, they would have to lie under the same blanket to talk at night. You've suffered these 2 years. The two of them finally separated and began to talk in a voice that Guhan could hear. Of course I've suffered. Jerusalem is not a place for women at all. It's a paradise for men. Ashma pursed her lips mockingly. Speaking of men, I haven't asked you what's going on with the man and woman behind you. I thought you'd do the same as me and let them fight first before sending them into the medical bay. Our relationship is exposed in front of these two people. If this news gets out, I'm afraid I won't have a good time in Jerusalem. I might even turn from a female slave of Allah to a female slave of all men. Forgive me for being blunt, but I'm afraid none of the three of you have the ability to send this man into the medical bay. This woman is no problem. If you want, you can send her in now. Lion Ling smiled. Lion Ling, you. Song Ifei was enraged when he heard that. She could not bully people like that. I can see that you're very good friends. How enviable. I don't have any friends in Jerusalem, Ashma said sadly. Guhan seemed to be able to feel Ashma's pain through the veil. Yes, I promise you that these two people will never tell anyone about our relationship. I trust them. Liuyan Ling promised Ashma very seriously. Oh, you're so confident. Ashma turned around and looked at Guhan through the veil. This man is very handsome. You trust him so much. Don't tell me he's your boyfriend. You're so annoying. You found out. Liuyan Ling said shyly. Wait, where did you get shyness from? If you were really shy, shouldn't you be denying that Guhan is your boyfriend? You really have a boyfriend? I just said it casually. This time, it was Ashma's turn to be confused. She knew Liuyan Ling. She was the descendant of the Liuyan family. Moreover, she was very proud and had never cared about other men. How could she have a boyfriend? It's true. You can ask him if you don't believe me. Liuyan Ling pointed at Guhan. Guhan smiled bitterly in his heart, but he could only nod and admit it. He and Liuyan Ling had an agreement. In front of outsiders, they had to pretend to be a couple. Guhan nodded readily, but it made Song Ifei anxious. When did they become a couple? Song Ifei was so anxious that he kept pinching the soft flesh on Guhan's waist. Although there was a sharp pain in his waist, Guhan still maintained his smile. This calmness was also very impressive. Song Ifei's little movements were all seen by Ashma. She chuckled. Ling, it seems that you have a rival. Your boyfriend seems to be very popular. Which family's descendant is he from? Introduce him to me. Who knows, I might want to snatch him from your hands. It's fine. If you want to snatch him, go ahead. Good things are naturally popular. I, Liuyan Ling, don't care about things that others don't want to snatch. If you have the ability, you can snatch him from my hands. Liuyan Ling waved her hand nonchalantly. As for his family background, you've guessed wrong. He's just someone from an ordinary mortal family. He has nothing to do with our circle. You know, I like every man in our circle. From the moment they put on diapers, I see through all of them. Ordinary family? Ashma was shocked again. I didn't think that you, Ling, would like to play the game of a princess and a poor boy. Are you sure that your two ancestors will agree to this? They can't control me. I'm the heir of the Liuyan clan, not a pawn for them to marry. If the head of the Liuyan clan can't control his own fate, then the Liuyan clan should roll down from its position as the #1 clan in the world. It doesn't deserve this position, Liuyan Ling said proudly. You're always so domineering and do whatever you want. Liuyan Ling's words seemed to provoke some sadness in Ashma's heart. She shook her head, temporarily dispelling the emotions in her heart. Ling, we've talked about old times. Let's continue the battle. Otherwise, I won't know what to say to those idiots when they wake up. We've only talked for a short while. Liuyan Ling still had many things to say to Ashma, but from Ashma's tone, it seemed that she had no intention of continuing the conversation. Thus, Liuyan Ling didn't force it. Then let's start the battle. Show me what you've got. I want to see how strong you've become in the 2 years you've been in Jerusalem. Liuyan Ling said with her sword in hand. No, no, no. Before we fight, I want to see your boyfriend's skills. I want to see if he's worthy of the position of the little princess of the Liuyan clan. Ashma drew a long sword with a series of Arabic characters on it from her waist. Guhan's eyes narrowed. This should be one of the 6 divine swords of faith of the new green sect, the sword of posterity. But Liuyan Ling didn't want Guhan to fight. She still wanted to defeat her good sister herself. However, before Liuyan Ling could object, Guhan leaped into the ring and pressed down on Liuyan Ling's shoulder. Let me do it. Since someone has called out my name, how can I not accept the challenge? Liuyan Ling sighed and stopped trying to stop him. Instead, she turned to Guhan and warned, all right, be careful. Ashma isn't someone to be trifled with. From a certain point of view, I might not be her match. You must be careful. Don't worry. From a certain point of view, you're not my match either. Guhan smiled and drew his Etienne sword. You've rested for a day. Etienne, it's time for you to practice. Chapter 395. This heroine's head is still dizzy. Why did you call this heroine out? Yi Tian rubbed her head and glared at Guhan in dissatisfaction. Don't make this heroine fight so easily. Aren't you good enough yourself? Why don't you fight by yourself? I'm not as good as you. Guhan said sincerely. I'm not as good at fighting as you are. You seem to be quite honest. Yi Tian nodded in satisfaction. All right, this heroine will accept this fight. I'd like to see which arrogant fellow dares to go against this heroine. The number 1 sword, Lady Yi Tian. Ashma was shocked when she saw the lazy and slightly drunk Yi Tian appear in the arena. She had only wanted to help Liuyan Ling test Guhan's character. She had not expected Guhan to take out the heavenly sword. No wonder you've taken a fancy to him. Ling, you have a good eye. You've even pulled out Lady Yi Tian, who has been silent for 300 years. Ashma began to understand why Liuyan Ling would become Guhan's girlfriend. However, Ashma was wrong. Before Guhan and the heavenly sword had synchronized, Liuyan Ling had already taken a liking to Guhan. They had even agreed to pretend to be boyfriend and girlfriend. Can I get to know you? Sir, my name is Ashma. I'm Ling's good friend. She's a good bestie. She's a good bestie, Ashma said softly through the veil. Guhan. Guhan's answer was simple and clear. Guhan? Your surname is Gu? Ashma suddenly recalled a description in the New Green Sect's classic, the New Holy Quran. Her heart skipped a beat, and she began to have other thoughts about Guhan. However, Ashima didn't speak of this directly. She nodded and spoke gently. Even though I'm clearly aware that I'm no match for Lady Heaven Reliance, I'm still bold enough to use the future sword to offend you. With that, the future sword in Ashima's hand suddenly turned into a ball of fog, a fog that seemed to distort the light around it. As for what was inside the fog, it was impossible to see clearly. Is this one of the 6 divine swords of faith of the New Green Church? Just like her introduction, she's always shrouded in mystery. Guhan praised sincerely. The 6 divine swords of faith were like this. Apart from the angelic sword that had the appearance of an angel, the other 5 divine swords were forever hidden in the fog. No one could see their appearance clearly, as if they had no physical form. In response to this, many people suggested that the Human Great Sword Council remove the 6 divine swords of faith from the list of sword maidens. However, they were all rejected by the council. This was because apart from not having a physical form, the 6 divine swords of faith had the same characteristics as the other sword maidens. Therefore, after a long discussion, they finally determined that this form of fog was also one of the forms of the sword maidens, and the sword maidens didn't have to look like women. At the same time, the 6 divine swords of faith were probably one of the most difficult to define among the sword maidens. Sometimes, the power of the 6 divine swords of faith could be said to be unparalleled in the world, and could even destroy the number 1 sword maidens of the same level. However, sometimes, the power of the 6 divine swords of faith was frighteningly low, and could not even compare to the average level. It was said that the power of the 6 divine swords of faith did not depend on the sword maidens themselves, but on their wielder. The stronger the wielder's faith in Allah, the more powerful the 6 divine swords of faith would be. From this point of view, Ashima's future swords of faith should be one of the weaker ones. This could be seen from her attitude toward Lengthened City, which was full of disdain and mockery. However, when they actually fought, Guhan felt a huge pressure from future swords of faith. It would probably not be easy for the heavenly sword to deal with this opponent. Future swords of faith's fighting style was very special. Because she did not have a physical form, she never personally participated in the battle. Instead, like her name suggested, she fought by intercepting the future of others. What did intercepting the future mean? You'll know when you see what happens next. Guhan was the 3rd time Heavenly Sword had appeared. The first time was Je Tien Jendi. According to the time, Allah Jendi would only be born in another 200 years, so naturally, future swords of faith had not appeared. The second time was a certain sword immortal. He had a falling out with Heavenly Sword when he was still a famous sword. Since then, Heavenly Sword had been trapped in its scabbard and had never been used. Naturally, it had never had the experience of fighting against future swords of faith. The third time was Guhan. This was the first time Heavenly Sword had fought against future Swords of Faith. Therefore, Heavenly Sword was completely unfamiliar with future Swords of Faith. Even though Guhan had told her through the sword mark that future Swords of Faith's fighting style was intercepting the future, Heavenly Sword was still confused. She did not understand what intercepting the future meant or how it fought. However, Heavenly Sword soon understood what was going on. Intercepting future Swords of Faith. A somewhat hoarse voice was heard from within the fog. Could this be the voice of future Swords of Faith? It seemed that future Swords of Faith was also a sword mistress with a soul and even a physical body. It was not just the fog that some people were talking about, Guhan thought to himself. Guhan was able to gather very little information about future Swords of Faith because most of the people who had seen future Swords of Faith in battle were followers of the Green Church. Followers of the Green Church never went online. If it wasn't for the fact that they wanted to maintain a certain level of contact with other cities, they might have even gotten rid of the internet in their base cities. Putting aside Guhan's thoughts, after Future Swords uttered the words intercepting future Swords of Faith, she did not say anything else. However, the next moment, a tall and slender girl walked out of the fog. She had a heroic face, a long sword on her back, a gourd in her hand, and the way she kept pouring wine into her mouth. This girl was clearly Heavenly Sword herself. F***ck, why is there another me? Heavenly Sword could not believe her eyes. Was the person who walked out of the fog really herself? That's not you, or should I say, that's the future you. Just as Heavenly Sword was feeling confused, Guhan's explanation reached her ears through the sword mark. Intercepting future Swords of Faith is pulling your future self from the future to the present, and then turning you into a puppet controlled by future Swords of Faith to fight. That's my future self. Heavenly Sword suddenly felt her balls ache. Oh wait, Heavenly Sword was a sword mistress, she didn't have balls. Heavenly Sword suddenly felt her boobs ache, but she was also a little excited. Back when she fought with Zetian, she had fought all kinds of enemies, but fighting with herself was something she had never experienced before. Just thinking about it made her a little excited. Then let me see just how powerful my future self is. Heavenly Sword let out a long roar, and her body instantly turned into a bolt of lightning, charging towards her future self. Future Heavenly Sword's reaction was also very fast. When Heavenly Sword charged over, she immediately raised her Heavenly Sword. The two Heavenly Swords clashed, clashing for several dozen times. The two of them had a tacit understanding, not using any skills, only competing with the purest form of swordsmanship. However, from the looks of it, future Heavenly Sword's swordsmanship was inferior to the real Heavenly Sword. After several dozen moves, future Heavenly Sword was already at a disadvantage. The real Heavenly Sword broke through her swordsmanship's defenses, and she fiercely slashed her body several times. Only Du Kang. In the end, the future Heavenly Sword could no longer endure being suppressed, and used a basic skill that only Du Kang could use. The Heavenly Sword's blade instantly emitted traces of burning flames, as if it was burning alcohol. This was a skill that the future Heavenly Sword had used to forcefully endure 3 attacks from the real Heavenly Sword before landing on the real Heavenly Sword. After being hit, a trace of red appeared on the real Heavenly Sword's face. She was currently in a drunken state, and her movement speed and attack speed had decreased significantly. At the same time, she also had to endure 100 points of burning damage per second. Damn, you're shameless. We agreed that we wouldn't use skills. The real Heavenly Sword quickly took a few steps back, putting some distance between herself and future Heavenly Sword. However, after saying this, future Heavenly Sword regretted her words. She was also facing future Heavenly Sword. Wasn't saying she was being shameless the same as saying she was being shameless? How could she scold herself? Although future Heavenly Sword's logic was somewhat chaotic, it could not be denied that she was truly somewhat angry and anxious. Just now, she had inadvertently used only Du Kang, forcing the real Heavenly Sword into a rather terrible situation. To the real Heavenly Sword, being in a drunken state was not a bad thing. After all, she was in a drunken state every day. She had long since gotten used to it. However, the problem was that 100 points of burning damage. Moreover, It was burning damage that lasted for 5 seconds. This had given Heavenly Sword a huge fright. The real Heavenly Sword's personal shield only had about 1,300 points of energy. After 5 seconds of burning, she was only left with 800 points of energy. If she did it again, Heavenly Sword's energy would be less than 300 points. At that time, it would really hurt. Facing the real Heavenly Sword's questioning, the future Heavenly Sword did not say anything. Instead, she picked up her Heavenly Sword and took the initiative to attack the real Heavenly Sword. After being suppressed by the real Heavenly Sword for a few dozen moves, the future Heavenly Sword began to counterattack. F***CK, this heroine will let you see what the real Lady Heavenly Sword is like. Heavenly Sword roared in extreme displeasure as she dodged the future Heavenly Sword's attack. Then, flames appeared on her own blade, returning the only Kang skill that the real Heavenly Sword had endured to the future Heavenly Sword. Pa 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 pa. A few seconds later, cracks began to appear on the future Heavenly Sword's personal shield. In the end, it completely shattered. When the future Heavenly Sword's personal shield completely shattered, her body was instantly sucked back by a huge suction force from the future sword's fog. She then disappeared. Did I win just like that? Heavenly Sword was dumbfounded. Was the future Heavenly Sword so weak? Thinking up to this point, although she had won, Heavenly Sword was still filled with displeasure. No, it is far from over. Your opponent is not the future you, but the future sword. She is still there, and your battle is not over yet. Chapter 396. How is it? How does it feel to fight against the future you? Taking advantage of the gap in the battle, Guhan asked Yi Tian through the sword mark. It feels a little weak. Yi Tian seemed to have forgotten the fact that his personal shield had almost been broken. He grinned and said, although her swordsmanship and my swordsmanship are of the same origin, and some of the details are even better than mine, her swordsmanship is too rigid. There is no spirituality at all. That's why I completely suppressed her in less than 30 moves. If I were a human, then the future me would at most be an inflatable doll. I only have the form, but I don't have my soul. I can't use my swordsmanship at all. Such an opponent, even if her swordsmanship was 10 times better, she would still not be able to defeat me. Yi Tian said it very well. He had basically described the characteristics of his opponent. However, to compare his future self to an inflatable doll, Yi Tian's thoughts were really broad. Then how about the future you in other aspects? For example, attack power, skill effects, shield energy, and so on. Guhan asked again. The other aspects are not that great. Her attack power is only half of mine, and the skill effects are also only half of mine. I don't know about the shield energy. In any case, it doesn't exceed 700 points. Otherwise, my only Kang plus the previous few attacks would not have been able to break her personal shield. Yi Tian replied. Ji Han looked at the energy of the Heavenly Sword's personal shield. It still had around 1050 points of energy left. The Heavenly Sword's personal shield had around 700 points of energy, and only around 450 points of energy was left. This meant that the future Heavenly Sword had at most burned away around 250 points of energy from the real Heavenly Sword. From the looks of it, the effect of the skill was indeed only half of the full 500 points. Guhan asked Yi Tian these questions because he wanted to know what kind of rules the future sword followed and what kind of restrictions it would have. Unfortunately, the information he got from Yi Tian was too little, and the information about the future sword on the internet was also very little. As for Sword Maiden Online, there was no existence of the future sword at all. Jerusalem City refused to provide the highest AI, Tomono Karkaze, with any information about the Sword Maidens in the Sword Pavilion, and also did not allow Sword Maiden Online to put Jerusalem's Sword Maidens data into the game. This directly caused a large number of Jerusalem's Sword Maidens to be missing in Sword Maiden Online. Therefore, Guhan could not come to a conclusion at all, because the information he could use was too little. P.S. There is a bug here. The author once said that Sword Maiden Online has all the Sword Maidens' data. I apologize here, I didn't think so much in the beginning, but when it came to Jerusalem, it became like this. So I have to fix it here. Sword Maiden Online only has a part of Jerusalem's Sword Maiden's data. Sword Maiden Online only has some Sword Maiden's data. Sorry. This is for you. Liuyan Ling suddenly sent a piece of information to Guhan's mind through her personal terminal. Although the communication with the outside world was cut off in the trial formation, it was still possible to maintain contact with personal terminals within a short distance. It was the same logic as when one's phone had no network and signal. It did not stop one from using Bluetooth to communicate with another phone. Guhan immediately read through the information Liuyan Ling gave him. It turned out to be the complete information on the future sword. It was like someone had sent him a pillow just when he wanted to doze off. This Liuyan Ling really understood Guhan's needs. Due to the Liuyan family's vast network of connections and information network, the Liuyan family's information on the future sword was much more than what could be found on the internet. The information on the future sword was also much more detailed. First of all, the future sword could not take 100% of the Sword Maiden's future attributes. Based on the wielder's sword essence and talent, it could take 20% to 200% of the Sword Maiden's attributes. In other words, if the heavenly sword had 100 attack power at some point in the future, then the attack power of the heavenly sword would be between 20 to 200 points. However, other than Alajendi, the other wielder of the future sword could only take less than 100% of the Sword Maiden's attributes. No other wielder could break the 100% limit. Secondly, there was the problem of the intercepting time. There was an obvious reason. If the future heavenly sword was intercepted a week later, it would definitely not be as strong as the future 1 month later. However, if the future heavenly sword was intercepted a few decades later, then it would be interesting. The future heavenly sword would be many times stronger than the current one. Even if it was only 20%, it would be able to completely crush the current heavenly sword. However, power was bound to be accompanied by some sort of limitation. The further into the future the heavenly sword was intercepted, the more sword essence it would consume. Even though the information did not clearly record how much sword essence it would consume, there was a clear standard. Aside from Sword Emperor Anla, there was at most one sword wielder who had intercepted a future fragment 1 month and 3 days into the future. Combined with what he had experienced with the heavenly sword, Guhan could roughly conclude that Ashima's intercepted attack power was around 50%. This was a very good figure. The owners of the future swords from other eras had only managed to intercept 50% of the sword essence at most when they were treasure swords. Ashima's talent could already be ranked at the top among all the previous sword wielder. Aya, looks like your strength hasn't changed much in 5 days, Lady Heavenly Sword, Ashima said with a smile. However, what did she mean by that? What did she mean by Lady Heavenly Sword's strength hasn't changed much in 5 days? Could it be that the future swords had intercepted Heavenly Sword's power 5 days later? Could it be that you're intercepting the Heavenly Sword from 5 days later? Ji Yuhan asked Ashima directly. That's right. The one who fought against Lady Heavenly Sword 5 days later was Lady Heavenly Sword 5 days later. That's why I said that Lady Heavenly Sword still needs to work harder. Your strength hasn't changed much in 5 days. Isn't that too lazy? Ashima said with a smile. You're wrong. The lazy one isn't Heavenly Sword, it's me. Guhan pursed his lips. Heavenly Sword's strength is completely dependent on me. The more sword essence I have, the stronger Heavenly Sword will naturally be in the future. That's right. That's the logic. Ashima's hand reached into the mist formed by the future swords. Then let me see if Mr. Guhan's strength has improved after a month. As Ashima's voice fell, the future Heavenly Sword once again walked out of the mist formed by the future swords. The Heavenly Sword 1 month later didn't look any different from the Heavenly Sword 5 days ago. However, for no reason, a soul-stirring aura emerged from the Heavenly Sword 1 month later. On the other side, Ashima, who had summoned the Heavenly Sword 1 month later, lost her balance and almost fell to the ground. She was panting heavily. Just as the information said, 1 month was probably Ashima's limit. After intercepting the limit of what the future swords could do, Ashima's sword essence was almost depleted. Hey, I'm a little interesting this time. The real Heavenly Sword's eyes lit up when it saw its opponent. The person most sensitive to the heavenly sword 1 month later should be the real heavenly sword herself. Just from the aura emitted by the heavenly sword 1 month later, the real heavenly sword knew that this battle wouldn't be as simple as the heavenly sword 5 days later. As expected, when the real heavenly sword and the heavenly sword 1 month later fought, the situation was completely reversed. Originally, in the previous battle, the real heavenly sword had suppressed the heavenly sword 5 days later. But now, he was actually being suppressed by the heavenly sword 1 month later. As they fought, the real heavenly sword felt that he could no longer hold on. Compared to the heavenly sword 5 days later, the swordsmanship of the heavenly sword was still the same and there was no improvement. However, what was shocking was that the attack power of the heavenly sword had increased by more than 5 times. The heavenly sword 5 days later originally only had half of the real heavenly sword's attack power, but after a month, its attack power had actually increased by 5 times, reaching 5 times that of the real heavenly sword. This was already an absolute suppression. If the opponent's sword technique was weak enough, heavenly sword could still use its own sword technique to suppress the opponent. However, the problem was that heavenly sword's current opponent was itself. Although its sword technique was rigid, its foundation was definitely the same as heavenly sword. This caused the real heavenly sword to be unable to rely on its own sword technique to suppress the opponent and gain an advantage. After exchanging a few dozen blows, the real Yi Tian rolled away in a wretched manner and dodged a fatal attack from the real Yi Tian. Then, he retreated madly and widened the distance between him and the real Yi Tian. At that moment, the real Yi Tian was panting heavily and his clothes were drenched in sweat. "Hey, Guhan, did you eat gunpowder a month later? Why are you so abnormal?" Heavenly Sword said helplessly. There was only one reason why the opponent's attack power had increased by 5 times, and that was because as the wielder of the heavenly sword, Guhan's sword element had also increased by 5 times. Currently, Guhan's sword element was more than 2,700 quarks. If it had increased by 5 times, wouldn't it be around 11,000 quarks? Could it be that Guhan would become a famed sword-level sword wielder in a month's time? Not only did Guhan not expect such a result, even Ashima, who had summoned the heavenly sword 1 month later, was dumbfounded. She pointed a finger at Guhan's head, her voice trembling as she choked out a sentence. "You're abnormal." Yes, if the heavenly sword that had been summoned was really the heavenly sword 1 month later, then there was no doubt that Guhan was an abnormal person. In a month's time, he had increased his sword element by 5 times, reaching around 10,000 quarks. Although it could not be said to be unprecedented, it was not far from being unprecedented. The number of people who could surpass Guhan's result could be counted on one hand. Chapter 397. This freak. The one who said this was Liuonian Ling, who was watching from the side. She was also shocked by the strength that Yi Tian had displayed after 1 month. "Yi Tian, can you continue fighting? If you can't, I'll do it myself," Guhan said to Yi Tian through the sword mark. He had already discovered Yi Tian's weakness. If this went on, Yi Tian would definitely lose. "No need, I can deal with this guy alone." Yi Tian gritted her teeth and said. Her pride did not allow her to accept Guhan's help. Moreover, she was facing herself. If she was defeated by Guhan in the future, wouldn't that mean that she was not as good as Guhan? As a result, in order to prove his strength, Yi Tian went all out. He used all of his swordsmanship and foundation, constantly using all sorts of exquisite swordsmanship. Gradually, he managed to turn the situation around. He completely relied on the exquisiteness of his swordsmanship to return to a level where he would be on par with his future self for a month. It looked very wonderful. If this continued, Yi Tian would be able to defeat her 1 month in the future. However, this could not last long. Yi Tian had relied on overdrafting her physical strength to achieve this. Once her body could not sustain such a high-intensity battle, Yi Tian might collapse at any time. Guhan, who was observing from afar, was well aware of this. Therefore, he had already made preparations. Once he noticed that Yi Tian's physical strength was starting to collapse, he would forcibly take over the entire battle. What a joke! How can I lose to my future self? Du Kang is the only one who can take my attack. Yi Tian was also well aware of her own state. Therefore, she had to quickly break through while her physical strength could still support her. Very soon, Yi Tian discovered such an opportunity. After a forceful attack, the 1 month in the future Yi Tian revealed a flaw. The real Yi Tian instantly grasped this flaw and appeared behind the 1 month in the future Yi Tian's back. Then, she attacked her with Du Kang is the only one. Very good. This attack should be able to wear off 1/10 of the energy of her personal shield. As long as I attack her 10 more times, she will be defeated by me. The real Yi Tian thought silently. However, it was impossible to rely on such a rare flaw to attack another 10 times. Du Kang's cooldown time was 15 seconds. In other words, the real Yi Tian would need at least another 3 minutes. This was too difficult for Yi Tian, whose physical strength was being consumed at a high speed. However, no matter what, this gave Yi Tian a glimmer of hope for victory. However, she never expected that this glimmer of hope would soon be completely extinguished by the 1 month in the future Yi Tian. According to the calculations of the real Heavenly Sword, after being hit by Du Kang, the Heavenly Sword's attack speed and movement speed would be reduced by 30%. In this way, the real Heavenly Sword would no longer need to maintain a high level of stamina to face the Heavenly Sword after a month. She could slightly relax and conserve more stamina to support the next 3 minutes of battle. Yi Tian's Yi Kang would be able to reduce. Yi Kang's attack and movement speed was Yi Tian. Logically speaking, there was nothing wrong with the real Yi Tian's thinking. If the other party slowed down, she could slow down as well. This was a very normal thing. However, Yi Tian did not expect that the moment she slowed down, the 1 month in the future Yi Tian would suddenly take out her wine gourd and pour a mouthful of wine into her mouth. Oh no! At the sight of this, Yi Tian howled in grief. How could she not know her own limits? When she saw that the white wine gourd in Yi Tian's hand had turned red after a month, Yi Tian knew that something was wrong. She immediately gathered her stamina and began to forcefully increase her movement speed. However, it was already too late. Everyone knew that once a person broke away from a highly concentrated state, it was impossible to return to a highly concentrated state in a short period of time. They needed to prepare for a period of time before they could return to that state. After the real Yi Tian broke away from a highly concentrated state, it was impossible for her to return without a few seconds. These few seconds were enough for the future Yi Tian to make a fatal attack. Numbing Mandala. After drinking a mouthful of the red wine gourd, the 1 month in the future Yi Tian's body glowed with a frightening red light. Then, her speed instantly returned to the state she was in before Du Kang attacked her. She slashed at the real Yi Tian. Because the real Sky Reliance had already lowered its speed, its rhythm was a beat slower when it was dealing with this move. This delay allowed 1 month later's sword to hit the real Sky Reliance's body squarely. The real Yi Tian instantly felt a numbness in her head. Her entire body could not move. It was as if her acupuncture points had been poked. She stood there softly, no longer attacking or moving. Oh no, Yi Tian has been paralyzed. In the distance, Guhan discovered that something was wrong with Yi Tian. However, even though Guhan discovered that something was wrong, he could not help Yi Tian at all. He could only watch as the 1 month in the future Yi Tian's attack fiercely hit the real Yi Tian. The real Yi Tian did not resist at all. She allowed the attack to hit her body. Then, she was sent flying more than 10 meters away by the huge force. The protective shield on her body was instantly filled with cracks. It was in a state where it could collapse at any time. Yi Tian, come back. Seizing this opportunity, Guhan forcibly returned Yi Tian to his hand. A sword maiden that was in contact with the opponent could not be summoned back by the sword wielder. She could only be summoned back by the sword wielder after she broke away from the opponent. Therefore, after seeing Yi Tian being sent flying and separated from the opponent, Guhan immediately returned Yi Tian to her sword. Yi Tian, who had been summoned back by Guhan, did not make a sound. Originally, she would not allow herself to be forcefully summoned back, but now she obediently shut her mouth. If Guhan had not summoned her back just now, she would have been paralyzed for a whole 5 seconds. These 5 seconds were enough for the 1 month in the future Yi Tian to kill her until her durability was 0. It could be said that Guhan's action had saved her life. How could she still have the face to quarrel with Guhan? That move just now was your advanced skill, Numdachara, right? Guhan smiled bitterly. Numdachara was Yi Tian's advanced skill, heavenly sword. Drink a mouthful of Numdachara and enter a state of excitement. Lose all sense of pain and become immune to all stun, paralysis, dizziness, and other mind control skills. Lasts 10 seconds. Moreover, during battle, there was a chance that the enemy would enter a state of paralysis for 5 seconds. Just now, the 1 month in the future Yi Tian had used this skill. She had immediately dispelled the drunken state caused by only Du Kang. Moreover, she had also triggered the paralysis effect of the attack, causing the real Yi Tian to be paralyzed on the spot for a whole 5 seconds. It was no wonder that the real Yi Tian could not move at all. Damn it. If you had given me deep sword scars earlier, I would have been able to use Numdachara. If that was the case, would I still be afraid of that fellow? This heroine would have been able to hang her up and beat her up. Yi Tian said indignantly. She had finally found a chance to put the blame on Guhan. I only have some sword scars, dust, and crystals. I don't even have any fragments. How could I help you reach deep sword scars? Guhan said helplessly. The things I have can only help you reach deep sword scars to deep sword scars at most. After all, I have only been a sword wielder for a few days. How could I have accumulated so much? Then how could she reach deep sword scars to deep sword scars? The she that the real Yi Tian was referring to was naturally the Yi Tian in the future. You can be jealous of anyone, but why are you jealous of her? Guhan's tone became even more helpless. She is you in the future. This means that I would have strengthened you to deep sword scars in a month. You should be happy. I'm so good to you. This heroine doesn't care about this. It's your fault that you didn't strengthen me to deep sword scars. Otherwise, how could I have lost to myself? Yi Tian said this without any confidence. She was forcefully pushing the blame away. Guhan curled his lips. He could not be bothered to argue with Yi Tian anymore. Mr. Guhan, how about it? Do you want to admit defeat? On the other side, Ashima smiled tenderly. You are indeed very powerful. I didn't expect you to be this powerful in a month. Otherwise, my future sword scars would not be able to defeat your heavenly sword. Right now, the shield of your heavenly sword scars is about to break. It's better to admit defeat and let me and Ling have a showdown. Ashima's words were very problematic. What did she mean by a showdown? Could it be that one of them was a male and the other was a female? Letting go of this huge point, Guhan naturally would not admit defeat in the face of Ashima's persuasion. He did not want to lose to a woman. Guhan grasped the heavenly sword in his hand tightly. He shook the sword in his hand and said with a smile, I'm still fine, aren't I? It won't be too late to surrender when Yi Tian defeats me. Could it be that Mr. Guhan is also a sword master? Ashima was shocked. She felt a faint sense of disdain in her heart. Nowadays, sword masters were becoming more and more worthless. Anyone who had grasped some *T swordsmanship dared to call themselves a sword master. That's fine too. I'll beat Liuanian Ling's little lover into a pig's head. This will also make Liuanian Ling lose face. For a woman, her man was the most important bargaining chip between women. If you don't believe me, just look at those student gatherings. How many women say how awesome and rich their man is? When have they ever said how awesome they are? Hee. Since that's the case, Ashima will have a taste of Mr. Guhan's skills. Just now, it was Mr. Guhan's heavenly sword that took the initiative to attack. Now, it's my turn to give it a try. Chapter 398. She really is strong. As soon as Guhan clashed with the heavenly sword, he felt a huge pressure from the heavenly sword. Indeed, whether it was strength or speed, she was much stronger than Guhan. Guhan exchanged dozens of blows with her, but he didn't gain the slightest bit of advantage. Guhan used many exquisite moves, but they were all blocked by Heavenly Sword's brute force. On the contrary, Guhan had to focus and use all kinds of dodging techniques to negate Heavenly Sword's attacks. Just like that, the two of them exchanged dozens of blows, and it seemed like neither could do anything to the other. Where did this guy called Guhan come from? How can his swordsmanship be so terrifying? Ashima was dumbfounded as she watched the battle between Guhan and Heavenly Sword. Why did this guy called Guhan's swordsmanship seem to be not much weaker than Liuyan Ling's? Can I block Heavenly Sword's attack? On the other side, Liuyan Ling was also asking herself if she could defeat the Heavenly Sword if she was in Guhan's position. But very quickly, Liuyan Ling shook her head in shame. Unless she used the billion sword technique or some other powerful swordsmanship, she might not be able to reach Guhan's current level with just swordsmanship. In other words, in terms of swordsmanship, Liuyan Ling was inferior to Guhan. This was very embarrassing. As the descendant of the dignified Liuyan family, her swordsmanship was actually inferior to someone of the same age. This was very rare in history. After all, apart from a few people, the descendants of the Liuyan family were all talented in swordsmanship. In addition, they had received the best swordsmanship education since they were young. In the past 1,000 years, the number of people who could surpass the Liuyan family in swordsmanship could be counted on one hand. There were probably no more than 20 people. It seemed like the number of people couldn't be counted with 2 hands, let's count with 2 feet. Just like that, both sides were evenly matched. From dozens of moves, to hundreds of moves. Then, Guhan gradually gained the upper hand. For some unknown reason, Guhan did not overdraft his physical and mental power like the real Heavenly Sword. He just maintained a certain rhythm and slowly gained the upper hand. How could that be? How did he gain the upper hand? Ashima furrowed her brows tightly. Although she didn't know any sword techniques, her understanding of sword techniques was very deep. She could already tell that Heavenly Reliance was at a disadvantage, and had switched from being evenly matched to being on the defensive. But she couldn't understand why it was like this. Guhan clearly didn't make any changes. This is a change in power. Liuyan Ling, on the other hand, seemed to understand something. After all, as the successor of the Liuyan family, she still had some discernment and knew much more than Ashima. Hey, what is a change in power? Song Yifei moved closer to Liuyan Ling and asked softly. The so-called power is a type of power that can only be used when a sword master's swordsmanship has reached a certain level. Liuyan Ling muttered, power isn't something that you have from the start. Instead, it is accumulated through various details in a competition of swordsmanship. It's like 2 people building a house at the same time. One of them uses 100 bricks a day, while the other uses 101 bricks a day. You might not be able to see any difference in a short period of time, but after a long period of time, the difference will become apparent. The latter's house will be taller and sturdier than the former. Of course, this analogy is also inappropriate. The addition of a brick to a house could at least be seen, but the accumulation of force was indeed invisible. When you realize that the opponent's momentum has already taken shape, you have already fallen into the opponent's momentum. Unless you also have your own momentum, or use a powerful skill to forcefully break through the opponent's momentum, you will definitely lose this fight. Liuyan Ling finished speaking, but there was one thing that Liuyan Ling didn't say. As the direct descendant of the Liuyan family, Liuyan Ling had only touched the edge of her power. She was still a thin membrane away from truly possessing her own power. However, Guhan had already mastered it. This was an irrefutable fact that told Liuyan Ling that her swordsmanship was indeed inferior to Guhan's. Liuyan Ling's explanation made Song Yifei dizzy. However, Song Yifei understood that Guhan had already gained the upper hand. If Heavenly Reliance couldn't break through this so-called power, then it would definitely lose. Go. Guhan, you can do it. Song Yifei suddenly shouted like a little fan of Guhan, breaking the silence in the arena and giving everyone a shock. This idiot, what's the use of cheering? Guhan cursed inwardly. However, he didn't know why the sword in his hand had become smoother. Even Guhan's own power had faintly become more vigorous. This time, Heavenly Reliance became even more unbearable. This Heavenly Reliance was only an intercept of the future Heavenly Reliance. It only had Heavenly Reliance's instincts, but it didn't have Heavenly Reliance's soul. Therefore, the swordsmanship seemed very stiff and didn't have any spirituality to speak of. However, even with its own instincts, Heavenly Reliance felt like it was trapped in an invisible cage. Moreover, this cage was constantly shrinking. Finally, there would be a moment when it would be completely bound by this cage and fall into inevitable defeat. Therefore, Heavenly Reliance decided to end this stage of purely competing swordsmanship and start using its own skills to determine the outcome. It wanted to forcefully break through this incomparably unbearable cage of power. Only Du Kang, Heavenly Reliance poured a mouthful of Du Kang wine into its mouth. The blade of the sword burned with alcohol. Then, it wanted to give up its defense and use this move on Guhan at the cost of injuring itself. Heavenly Reliance's personal shield was 2.5 times that of Guhan's. If it could successfully change the shield's energy, no matter how it was calculated, Heavenly Reliance would make a huge profit. Therefore, it went without saying that Guhan wouldn't let Heavenly Reliance do as it wished. Since Heavenly Reliance had already used its skill, then Guhan could also use his 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Facing Heavenly Reliance's sword that was going all out to kill him, Guhan's heart moved. He used the 9 swords of mysterious heaven movement technique sword curtain formation. With a mysterious twist of his body, he miraculously dodged the sword that was almost certain to hit him. Then, he appeared at Heavenly Reliance's side. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword of the abyss. Guhan, who had appeared at Heavenly Reliance's side, immediately used sword of the abyss. 5 rays of sword chi burst forth from the blade of Heavenly Reliance like beautiful plum blossoms, colliding with Heavenly Reliance's body just like that. When was a bullet's most powerful? Naturally, it was when the bullet had just left the chamber. Similarly, the sword chi was naturally the most powerful when it had just emerged from the blade of the sword. The distance between Guhan and Heavenly Reliance was simply too close, so when the sword chi rushed out, it directly hit Heavenly Reliance's body. In an instant, Heavenly Reliance was pushed away by Guhan's powerful sword chi. With a stagger, it directly fell to the ground. F***ck. This person can even use sword chi. Ashima cried out again. It wasn't strange for a sword maiden to use sword chi, nor was it strange for a spirit sword wielder to use sword chi. However, for a treasure sword wielder to be able to use sword chi, that was very surprising. At the same time, Heavenly Reliance, who had fallen to the ground, struggled to get up. But how could Guhan let go of this opportunity? He used sword curtain formation with all his might. Before Heavenly Reliance could get up, Guhan stepped on his shoulder. Then, Guhan gripped the hilt of the sword with both hands. Glaring, he poured all the sword chi in his body into Heavenly Reliance. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven. Guhan used up most of the sword chi in his body to use the strongest killer move of the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling heaven. There was no limit to the power of sword battling heaven. Its power was completely dependent on how much sword chi Guhan had poured into the sword maiden's body. At that moment, Guhan had poured half of the sword chi in his body into Heavenly Reliance. In other words, that was 1,300 quarks of sword chi. One could only imagine how powerful it was. Heavenly Reliance, who had fallen to the ground, did not even have the time to fight back or dodge. Sword battling heaven struck its weakest point, its back. In less than half a second, Heavenly Reliance's thick, close-fitting shield was completely shattered. Guhan's Heavenly Reliance stabbed into Heavenly Reliance's body. Heavenly Reliance let out a miserable cry as its body turned into specks of starlight, disappearing without a trace. Phew! Guhan breathed a sigh of relief. Although he had won the battle, it had been a rather difficult one. Guhan had also revealed 2 of his trump cards, the Sword Force and the 9 Swords of Mysterious Heaven, which he had only managed to defeat Heavenly Reliance. However, it was not completely without its benefits. At the very least, it was the first time Guhan had fought against an opponent whose swordsmanship was on par with his own. It was very beneficial to Guhan's swordsmanship. After the battle, Guhan had a vague idea of how he should continue to advance. It was a benefit that could not be obtained at any price. On the other side, Following Heavenly Reliance's death a month later, the mist formed by the future beckoning sword suddenly began to spread violently. It felt like a patient coughing from a serious illness. The mist constantly dispersed and gathered. This continued for a while before it slowly calmed down. However, the color of the mist had become a lot brighter. Guhan could even vaguely see a graceful figure within the future beckoning sword. Aya, I can't believe I still lost. Mr. Guhan's swordsmanship is even better than Heavenly Reliance, who is ranked third in the famed swordsmanship. This is really unexpected. No wonder Ling took a fancy to Mr. Guhan at first glance. What a pity. If only Ashima was the first to meet Mr. Guhan, Ashima said in a daze, as if she really felt that it was a pity. However, Guhan knew that she was purely giving up. She was the Saintess of Jerusalem, the female slave of Allah. She was a woman who could never marry any man in her life. If she really did that with him, the entire Jerusalem would probably kill him. Guhan did not answer Ashima's words. Instead, he calmly asked, "How about it? You can admit defeat now, right?" From Guhan's point of view, Ashima's future beckoning sword had already used up all of its power. It was impossible for her to fight anymore. Even if she could fight again and summon the Heavenly Reliance from a month later, it would be useless. She would still be defeated by him. How can I admit defeat? Ashima still has the ability to do so. Ashima chuckled, as if she did not intend to admit defeat. She then said, "Since Mr. Guhan is so powerful, Ashima will summon the Mr. Guhan from a month later. Let's see who is more powerful between the two of you." Guhan almost stumbled. This woman was quite powerful. He was afraid that Guhan would not be able to defeat her 1 month later. Chapter 399. I'm just kidding. My future sword has already reached its limit. Can't you see that she can't even maintain her form? Guhan could almost feel Ashma sticking out her tongue behind the veil. With a wave of her hand, the future sword returned to its sword form and returned to Ashma's hand. Hearing Ashma's words, Guhan inexplicably let out a sigh of relief. To be honest, if Ashma really summoned Guhan in a month's time, just by looking at Yi Tian's strength, he knew that Guhan in a month's time would probably have reached the level of a famed sword. At the very least, his sword essence would have reached the level of a famed sword. In such a situation, Guhan could only admit defeat and hope that Liuanian Ling's billion swords technique would be able to defeat him. We concede defeat this round. We admit defeat, Ashma said to the air. Then, the entire arena quickly disappeared, and the space returned to its original size. The small bar rose from the ground again, and the dice on it also appeared. This die belonged to Guhan's team. They had won the final victory. Although they had won the final victory, Liuanian Ling was not in a hurry to leave the room. Instead, she moved closer to Ashma and the two of them chatted for more than an hour. Under Ashma's urging, they ended this long-awaited meeting. Let's go quickly. My two idiot teammates are about to wake up. Under Ashma's urging, Guhan's team finally threw the die and entered the next path. After Jiyu Han and the others left the room, only Ashima and the two patients were left in the medical chamber. Seeing that they still had 5 hours before they could be fully healed, Ashima's expression was hard to tell under her veil. If a third team arrives here at this time, it will be very bad. Won't I have to deal with a lot of people by myself? Ashma muttered to herself. As soon as she finished speaking, one of the walls of light in the room disappeared once again, and a figure walked out from the other side of the wall. Aya, I didn't expect you to have the talent of a jinx, Ashima. Ashima mocked herself in a low voice, and then immediately returned to her original appearance and temperament as a saintess. Mister, would you like to have a battle with this saintess? Ashima asked in a holy and ethereal voice. In the next 2 days, Guhan went back to the mode of constantly challenging the trials. Guhan and Liuanian Ling worked together to complete all the trials that they encountered along the way. The battle was still alright. Fighting against those Yuan Yang's memory fragments was actually the easiest. Usually, the poor cultivators would go up to practice. When the poor cultivators were tired of fighting, or when the poor cultivators couldn't beat them at all, they would directly switch to the heavenly sword. In short, It was just advancing forward. It was simple and clean, without any difficulty. What really gave Guhan a headache were the various skill-based trials. These trials were strange, and there were some that even Guhan found extremely difficult. For example, the requirement to eat 100 super hamburgers in 3 minutes. Guhan couldn't help but want to question Je Tianjendi about what kind of skill trial this was. What did eating fast have to do with fighting? What did it mean? Unfortunately, Je Tianjendi was no longer in this world, and Guhan couldn't find anyone to question even if he wanted to. Whether it was Guhan, Liu Nianling, or Song Yifei, they all looked at the 100 hamburgers in front of them with disdain and disdain. What a joke, they were all girls. Even if they were killed, they wouldn't be able to finish 100 hamburgers in 3 minutes. Fortunately, there was Qingpin in Guhan's team. These 100 tasks that were impossible in the eyes of Liu Nianling and Song Yifei were just a dinner that could barely fill his stomach in the eyes of Qingpin. Therefore, under the admiring but not jealous eyes of Liu Nianling and Song Yifei, Qingpin easily ate all the hamburgers. In the end, he even patted his slightly round belly and said cutely, "Guhan, do you have any more? This is quite delicious." Guhan looked at the time. There was still about a minute left before the 3-minute time limit. He estimated that no one in this world could surpass Qingpin in terms of eating. Oh, that's right. Other than eating, there was also drinking. This was naturally Yi Tian's forte. Seeing Yi Tian happily finishing more than 100 bottles of all kinds of alcohol in one go, Ji Yuhan secretly decided that in the next 10 hours, even if the poor guy wasn't willing to fight, he would force the poor guy to fight instead of letting Yi Tian out. God knows what she would do when she was drunk like a muddy puddle. Seeing that the red icon on the map was getting closer and closer to the end, Ji Yuhan felt that the trial was about to reach its end. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. The one who had an accident was none other than Ji Yun, whom Guhan had been somewhat neglecting. Ever since Ji Yun came out of the scabbard, she had been very quiet, so much so that Guhan had somewhat neglected her existence. Along the way, although Ji Yun was not as stiff as a rock like in the hovercraft, she was not much better. She would eat, sleep, and be very well behaved, but she had become very quiet, and her eyes often looked very empty, as if she had lost her soul. Guhan had never figured out what was going on with Ji Yun. Although the paternity test showed that Ji Yun was indeed Guhan's sister, Guhan still had some doubts about Ji Yun's origin. Vaguely, Guhan even had some very strange conjectures about Ji Yun. Originally, Guhan planned to deal with Ji Yun after returning to Yuzhang City, but when they were halfway through the trial, Ji Yun had a big problem. Ji Yun suddenly disappeared. That was one day after she went to sleep. Guhan, who was always the first to get up, patrolled the entire tent, and was surprised to find that Ji Yun had disappeared. Under normal circumstances, Ji Yun should have slept next to Guhan like Qingpin, but when he woke up this morning, Ji Yun had disappeared from Guhan's side. He couldn't find any trace of her at all. Guhan, who was a little flustered, searched the entire room, but there was no trace of Ji Yun. The rooms in the trial were all white, and besides Guhan's tent, there was no other junk. Unless Ji Yun could become invisible, it was impossible to hide in this room. Unable to find her in the room, Guhan went to check his scabbard. Guhan thought that when Ji Yun came out of the scabbard, she might have hidden in the scabbard. Of course, he didn't find anything, and instead, all the sword ladies were in a mess. Just when Guhan thought that Ji Yun might have thrown the dice and left secretly, Song Yifei found something. When she was helping Guhan tidy up his bedding, she suddenly found a short dagger hidden in Guhan's quilt. "Hey, Ji Yuhan, you're not trying to assassinate me, are you?" Song Yifei waved the dagger in her hand and said, "Nonsense, right, I'm not worth killing. You should want to kill Liu Nianling. After all, she is the descendant of the Liu Nian family. If you kill her, you can get a lot of money. Even if you kill me, you won't have a chance to rise to the top." Liu Nianling patted Song Yifei's head from behind. It seemed that the relationship between the two girls had improved a lot. They could even talk about each other on a daily basis. But Song Yifei is right. "Guhan, why did you hide a dagger under the quilt?" "This isn't my dagger. It looks like Ji Yun's dagger." Ji Yuhan took the dagger and looked at it carefully. Finally, he confirmed that this was the dagger that he had snatched from the 3 girls before he set off. It was also the dagger that Ji Yun wanted to obtain even if she had to die. This dagger should be Ji Yun's. Why would she leave it under my quilt? Gu Han's heart sank. I know. Maybe Ji Yun wanted to assassinate you. Then, she couldn't bear to kill you, so she ran away. Isn't that how it is in the TV series? Song Yifei said heartlessly. However, even a fool could tell that she was joking. Her purpose was probably to ease the atmosphere in the room that was getting more and more tragic. However, her words touched Gu Han's heart. Recalling Ji Yun's inexplicable appearance, as well as Ji Yun's identity as his younger sister, Seiji felt that something was amiss no matter how he looked at it. Perhaps Ji Yun really was someone sent by some faction to kill him, just like Reina Takasaka. Since he was acquainted with the heaven-shrouding Sword Emperor in the past, it was possible that some of the current forces also had the ability to travel through time and space and understand the past and future. If they wanted to eliminate him, it was not impossible. And Ji Yun was the chess piece they sent to kill him. Just like what Song Yifei said in her joke, maybe Ji Yun was not willing to kill him, so she decided to leave him and escape from him. No matter how he listened to it, it sounded like a serious drama. Of course, Gu Han did not have any evidence for this speculation. Moreover, the speculation itself was full of loopholes, and there were many things that could not be explained clearly. Then what should we do now? Should we look around here again? Liuyan Ling looked around. In fact, there was nothing to look for, because Gu Han had just turned these things inside and out more than 10 times. Forget it, let's go. Gu Han shook his head and began to put his things into his dimensional pocket. I have a feeling that Ji Yun is by our side, and she is not too far away from us. After that, Gu Han put Ji Yun's dagger into his arms. This dagger was an important clue. In the future, finding Ji Yun would depend on this dagger. Chapter 400. Due to Ji Yun's disappearance, the whole team suddenly became gloomy. Although their progress was still smooth, they did not find any traces of Ji Yun along the way. If Ji Yun really did sneak away that night, then Ji Yun would definitely be in one of the rooms that he entered. Unfortunately, when Gu Han's team was less than 10 squares away from the final destination, they still could not find Ji Yun. Either Ji Yun encountered an incident room and was forcefully teleported to another cubicle, just like how Gu Han was teleported to Liuyan Ling's side. Or Ji Yun took the initiative to give up on a certain mission and chose to give up the trial and leave the trial array. No matter which choice it was an extremely dangerous decision for Ji Yun. Where was the missing Ji Yun? Forget it, don't worry about Ji Yun. We are only one step away from the final destination. Wait until we pass this trial array, then we can look for Ji Yun. There's no hurry. Gu Han, who should have been the most anxious and closest to Ji Yun, took the initiative to comfort his 2 companions. With Gu Han's consolation, the whole team finally regained some of their firepower. Let's see what room this is. Gu Han walked to the small bar and glanced at the words on the small bar. He was a little surprised to find that it was actually a prop room. Gu Han had only heard about it from Liuyan Ling, but it was the first time he had seen a prop room. The electronic map in Liuyan Ling's hands was a prop from the prop room. Oh, we're finally lucky. We don't have to face those strange missions and Yuan Ku anymore. Seeing that it was a prop room this time, Liuyan Ling also showed a rare smile. This is the simplest grid. I didn't expect to see a prop room just a step away from the final destination. Hurry up and activate it, let's see what we can get this time. Okay. Gu Han's answer was simple and clear. He lightly touched the small bar, and the surface of the small bar suddenly separated. Under the surface was a square box with 9 different colors. Inside the box were 9 brocade sachets of different colors. Let's draw a brocade pouch. Whatever we draw will be the item. Liuyan Ling, who had experienced it once, explained to Gu Han. Gu Han nodded. Then, he casually took out a brocade pouch from the compartment of the brocade pouch as usual. This pouch is actually a dimensional pocket. As soon as Guhan put his hand into the brocade pouch, he was taken aback. This brocade pouch was actually a dimensional pocket. Furthermore, the pocket space wasn't small. It was much larger than the dimensional pocket that the Sword Committee had given to Guhan. The dimensional pocket distributed by the Sword Committee was a standard dimensional pocket of 10 cubic meters, but this brocade pouch had more than 100 square meters of dimensional space, which was 10 times larger than the pocket Guhan was currently using. Such a brocade pouch could completely contain the floating bus that Guhan came on. This was a treatment that only spirit sword bearers could have. It had to be known that for something like a dimensional pocket, as the space inside it increased, the amount of materials consumed would also increase exponentially. If creating a dimensional pocket of 10 square meters required 1 unit of materials, then creating a dimensional pocket that was 10 times larger would require 100 units of materials. In other words, the small brocade pouch in Guhan's hand was at least 100 times more expensive than the dimensional pocket distributed by the Sword Committee. Guhan wasn't sure exactly how much it was worth, but in the hero coin shop, it should be worth at least 100,000 hero coins. This was more than an ordinary ancient sword bearer's lifetime's worth of hero coins. With just this small brocade pouch, no matter what the final reward was, Guhan would be able to recoup his losses from this trial. The rest would all be considered as Guhan's profit. What's wrong with you? Why are you staring at this brocade pouch in a daze? Seeing that Guhan hadn't taken out the item in the brocade pouch, Liuyan Ling was a little anxious. What's so interesting about a small brocade pouch that's not even a cubic meter? Quickly take out the item inside and let me see. Liuyan Ling's words made Guhan feel strange. Could it be that the brocade pouch that Liuyan Ling had obtained before was less than a cubic meter? If it was only that small, then it was very much in line with the style of Zhetian Gendi's era. In Guhan's era, such a small dimensional space wasn't worth much money. Nowadays, even the factories that produced dimensional pockets didn't bother to produce such a small dimensional pocket, because no one would buy such a small dimensional pocket. However, in Zhetian Gendi's era, dimensional space technology wasn't mature enough. Wanting to create a dimensional pocket with a large space was a very extravagant matter. It was only possible to succeed by using all kinds of rare materials. Therefore, in that era, the Sword Council didn't distribute dimensional pockets to their swordbearers. If a swordbearer wanted their own dimensional pocket, they would have to collect the materials themselves and ask them to help make it. They would either obtain the dimensional pocket left behind by their predecessors, or they would have to spend a lot of money to buy a dimensional pocket. In short, dimensional pockets were definitely very rare items back then. Out of 5 swordbearers, not even one would have a dimensional pocket. At that time, dimensional pockets were basically about a cubic meter in size. If the rewards on the bar counter were all left behind from Zhetian Gendi's era, then the dimensional pocket in Guhan's hand that was 100 cubic meters in size would be many times more precious back then. It was estimated that 9 out of 10 sword immortals didn't have such a large dimensional pocket. Back then, Zhetian Gendi just casually used it to store a small item, and then casually gave it to someone else. Wasn't Zhetian Gendi being a little too generous? If such a dimensional pocket was given to a team of swordbearers, they might be able to save a lot of lives. No, maybe the pockets in the 9 compartments were all like the one that Ling got. Mine is the only one that's special, Guhan suddenly thought. With that thought, Guhan decided not to dwell on this problem. He probed the space inside the pocket with his mind, and found that in such a large space, there was only a small wooden box. The rest of the space was empty. It seemed to be a completely new dimensional pocket. Guhan took out the wooden box from the pocket and put the small brocade pouch into his clothes. Dimensional pockets were mutually exclusive, so a dimensional pocket couldn't be put into another dimensional pocket. However, the space inside the scabbard wasn't restricted. This was because the space inside the scabbard was protected by the sword maiden, so it wouldn't conflict with the space inside the dimensional pocket. However, a sword maiden could only protect the scabbard that they lived in. If there were more, they would be helpless and could only hang it on their body. What's in this box? It doesn't look like there's anything valuable in it. Liuyan Ling snatched the wooden box from Gu Han's hands, raised it up, and put it down again. The wooden box was a standard rectangle, and the cross-sectional area was only about the size of a book. With such a small box, Liuyan Ling probably couldn't contain anything valuable. Hey, there's a secret manual in it. Liuyan Ling couldn't wait to open the wooden box, and found that there really was a book inside. It was a thin booklet that seemed to be only a few dozen pages long. The cover was blue, and other than the title printed on a white strip, there were no other decorations. It was a very simple book, and it seemed to be a product of the medieval era. Let me see. The blood in Gu Han's body boiled when he saw the book. He recognized the book. The secret manual was exactly the same as the 3 sword techniques that were passed down in his family. It also had a simple blue cover with a white stripe printed with the title of the book. If the characteristics of the other ancient books were similar to this, then there was a small tadpole-shaped mark on the lower right corner of the cover, which was a special mark that no other ancient book would have. The moment Gu Han saw the small tadpole, he felt that the book was in the same series as his family's secret manual. If that was the case, then there must be a connection between the 2 books. Gu Han calmly took the secret manual from Fleeting Time's hands. The moment he touched it, Gu Han was even more certain that the book was in the same series as his family's secret manual, because the texture of the book was the same as the other 3 secret manuals. Some readers would say, isn't this bullsh*t? Isn't the texture of the book the same? Of course not. If it was a book that had been printed in batches of hundreds of thousands or millions of copies, the texture would be the same. However, for a secret manual, the texture would be different depending on the material used, the era, and the way it was made. If you were lucky enough to touch some of the ancient books, you would realize that the texture of almost every ancient book would be slightly different. Only the same series of books printed by the same bookseller in the same era would have the same texture. The secret manual in Gu Han's hands was different from the 3 secret manuals that were passed down in his family. Most of the ancient books were printed on paper, but the secret manual in Gu Han's hand was made with a rare type of silk paper. The method of making it had long been lost. The reason why this kind of paper was called silk paper was because the books felt like silk in the hand. The moment Gu Han touched the book, he could feel the smoothness of silk. It was the same material that was used in his family's secret manual. Hey, what's written in this book? Is it the story of Gendi's love and hatred? Song Yifei poked his head in and glanced at the title of the book. Yin-Yang Swordsmanship. Song Yifei read the name of the secret manual. He looks so awesome. Chapter 401. So, what does the yin-yang sword tactic say? Is it a powerful sword technique? Song Yifei asked expectantly. She was not a sword master, nor had she practiced swordsmanship. Therefore, she was the one who had no need for the yin-yang sword tactic. She only asked out of curiosity. I don't know. Ji Han read through the entire yin-yang swordsmanship manual very seriously. His expression was a little gloomy, or perhaps it could be said that he was a little disappointed. Obviously, the contents of this manual did not satisfy Ji Han. Let me see. Liuyan Ling stretched out her hand to ask Gu Han for the yin-yang sword tactic. Gu Han hesitated slightly, but still handed the yin-yang sword tactic to Liuyan Ling. Not only did Zhong Xian have his own strength, but Fleeting Time Rin had also played a part in obtaining the book. There's actually such a sword technique in this world. Unlike Gu Han, who had disappointment written all over his face, Liuyan Ling was very happy and excited. What's wrong? Is it very powerful? Song Yifei asked excitedly. No, this yin-yang swordsmanship manual is completely useless. Fleeting Time Lin was much more excited than Ji Han, but his conclusion was much more direct. This yin-yang swordsmanship manual may be very powerful, but it's a pity that it's completely useless. What the hell is this? Don't be so confused. Can't you guys talk properly? Song Yifei said with dissatisfaction. To put it simply, this is indeed a very powerful sword technique. After mastering it, it might not be any weaker than our innumerable sword technique. Liuyan Ling gave the yin-yang sword tactic a very high evaluation from the beginning. She actually put the yin-yang sword tactic on the same level as the innumerable sword technique. Since ancient times, there had been no sword technique that dared to be compared to the innumerable sword technique. Oh, so powerful. Song Yifei nodded and asked further, how powerful is it? After cultivating the yin-yang sword technique, one can break through the limitation of only being able to fight with one sword maiden at the same time, allowing the attributes of two sword maidens to be stacked together. If one also cultivates the yin-yang sword technique, then the swordmaster will be able to fight with two swords at the same time. The attributes of the two swords will all be added to the swordmaster, and the 8 skills of the two sword maidens can be used at the same time. Moreover, the two sword maidens' skills can be fused together to form a new skill. TSK, this is really too powerful. If someone really manages to master this yin-yang sword art, they would definitely be able to use it. Let alone me, I'm afraid that even my father would be helpless and be trampled on. A yearning expression appeared on Liu Nianling's face. At that time, I'm afraid that a famed sword master would be able to suppress a spirit sword master. If Jendi manages to master it, I'm afraid that all of the Yuan coups will tremble under the hands of this Jendi, just like our ancestor back then. It's that powerful. When Song Yifei heard Liu Nianling's description, he couldn't help but be cautious. Why do you still say that it's useless? Because cultivating the yin-yang sword technique requires two sword maidens. Liu Nianling rolled her eyes. 2 sword maidens? What's wrong with that? I have 2 sword maidens right now. Song Yifei patted the sheaths of his wisdom sword and netherworld iris sword. As long as it's a treasure sword master, they should be able to cultivate the yin-yang sword technique, right? They all have 2 sword maidens. No, it's not that simple. Fleeting Ling shook his head. You don't just need 2 sword maidens to cultivate the yin-yang sword play. You need 2 sword maidens of the same level. 2 ancient sword maidens, 2 artifact sword maidens, or 2 famed sword maidens. In any case, you need 2 sword maidens of the same rank to cultivate it. Your Prajna sword and Netheriris sword won't be able to cultivate the yin-yang sword sutra. Song Yifei didn't expect that the yin-yang swordsmanship's cultivation conditions would be so abnormal. How was it possible to have 2 sword ladies of the same level at the same time? Didn't the sword wielder always cultivate in an orderly manner? Suddenly, Song Yifei's mind flashed. Linlin, I remember when we were in school, our teacher said that some sword wielders couldn't synchronize with higher-level sword mothers after breaking through the limit of sword essence, so they could only synchronize with sword mothers of the same level? Song Yifei recalled. Our teacher gave an example. There was a treasure sword master who tried for 30 years and more than 300 famed sword maidens, but he couldn't find a famed sword maiden that was willing to synchronize with him. Later on, he came across a sword maiden that was at the level of a sword maiden, and he suddenly succeeded in synchronizing with it. Just like that, he had 3 sword maidens, one of which was at the level of an ancient sword and 2 of which were at the level of a sword maiden. Didn't this satisfy the conditions that you mentioned for him to cultivate the yin-yang sword technique? I have 2 treasure sword maidens. Song Yifei said proudly. She felt that she had defeated Liu Nianling in terms of intelligence. It was such a simple thing, but Liu Nianling didn't think of it and said that it couldn't be cultivated. No, you can't. Liu Nianling rejected Song Yifei's suggestion. I forgot to tell you that if you want to cultivate the yin-yang sword technique, you must have 2 natural sword maidens. This is because the yin-yang sword technique can't be cultivated by the sword master alone. It requires the sword master and his 2 sword maidens to cultivate at the same time. Man-made sword maidens are sword maidens without souls. They can only passively listen to the sword master's commands. They don't have their own souls, so they can't cultivate any swordsmanship or sword skills. Therefore, only 2 natural sword maidens can cultivate the yin-yang sword technique with the sword master. Then let's synchronize with 2 natural sword maidens. It's not a big deal, Song Yifei blurted out. However, Song Yifei regretted it as soon as she said it. She seemed to remember that her teacher had once said that if a sword master synchronized with 2 sword maidens of the same level, it would be impossible to synchronize with 2 natural sword maidens of the same level. However, Song Yifei couldn't remember why. It's impossible. The purple mansion of the sword master can't accommodate two natural sword scars of the same level. It was Guhan who said this. He suddenly took over Liu Ling's job and took on the role of an explanation. Natural sword maidens have souls, so the sword scars of natural sword maidens also have their own souls. Sword scars with sentience are actually aggressive animals. For example, if an ancient sword level sword scar is a tiger, then a treasure sword level sword scar is a dragon. If there's a tiger and a dragon on the same mountain, then the tiger won't dare to provoke the dragon, and the dragon won't bother to deal with the tiger. Therefore, both sides can live in peace. However, if there are two tigers on top of the mountain, then these two tigers will inevitably start a fight until one side drives the other away or destroys it. Only then will peace be restored. The top of the mountain is the violet palace of us sword-bearers. The sword scars of two innate sword maidens of the same level are absolutely incompatible in the same violet palace. It's just like how a mountain can't contain two tigers, and they have to fight to the death. However, if one of them is an artificial sword maiden, which is a paper tiger, then the situation is completely different. A real tiger will not care about the existence of a fake tiger. Ji Yuhan explained a lot, which confused Song Yifei. Song Yifei clapped his hands and said, "Okay, I got it. You mean that a sword wielder can't have two natural sword ladies of the same level, and two natural sword ladies of the same level can't practice the yin-yang sword tactics. Therefore, it is impossible to practice the yin-yang sword tactics, right?" Song Yifei was speechless. He clapped his hands and said, "Okay, I got it. That's right. That's the reason." Liu Ling nodded and agreed with Song Yifei, which was rare. "Then I don't understand. Since the yin-yang sword scroll is impossible to learn, why would His Majesty Jendi put it in the item box? Isn't it meaningless?" Song Yifei continued unhappily. "Also, this yin-yang sword tactics should be a sword technique created especially for the sword lady, right? Isn't it a sword technique that already exists, just like most of your ancient martial arts? Then why did the creator of the yin-yang sword scroll create such a sword technique? More importantly, if the creator couldn't learn it himself, how did he create it?" Hearing Song Yifei's series of questions, Guhan and Liu Ling looked at each other. Song Yifei was right. They couldn't understand why there was such a sword technique that was impossible to learn. The existence of this sword technique itself was a very unscientific thing. Who can understand what happened in the past? Ji Yuhan silently put away the yin-yang sword secret art into his dimensional pocket. Although it seemed impossible to practice this magical sword technique, it was undeniable that the yin-yang sword secret art must have some kind of connection with his Jiyu family. This sword technique must be kept in his hands. It wouldn't be too late to study it when he returned to Yuzhang City. "Give me a 6. Song Yifei raised the die in his hand high and threw it heavily on the ground. At this time, there were only 6 squares left to the end. As long as Song Yifei threw a 6, Guhan and the others would successfully reach the end. The die spun rapidly on the ground for more than 10 seconds before it finally stopped. The number on the top was exactly 6, no more, no less. "Yes. We made it, we reached the end." Song Yifei waved his fist excitedly. After going through so many things, Guhan's team finally reached the end. Chapter 402. As the old saying goes, the road to happiness is strewn with setbacks. It was obviously not an easy task to successfully reach the final destination. When Guhan's team was only one step away from the final destination, a bear blocked their way. Too slow, too slow. It took you 4 whole days for the first person to reach the final step. You're too slow. It was a very pleasant female voice, but this female voice came from the throat of a bear. No matter how one listened to it, something was very wrong. In fact, there was nothing wrong with this bear. It was just a female bear. It's him. Liu Ling's hair stood on end when she saw the bear's appearance. She immediately pulled out her Yixian sword and put on a posture as if she was facing a mortal enemy. She faced the rather naive bear. "You know me." The bear was very surprised to see Liu Ling's posture. It was stunned for a while before it patted its head. "Divinity, I remember now. You're the sword-bearer that I chased into the trial array. This is the bear that chased you here. Guhan was shocked when he heard the bear's words. Only then did he remember that the reason Liunyang Ling had entered the trial array was because she was looking for the emperor sword hidden in Changyang Mountain. She was chased by an earth bear that suddenly appeared and escaped into the trial array to save her life. That's right, it's this bear. It's the one that chased me all the way here. But why? Why can a Yuan Ku enter His Majesty's trial array? Liunyang Ling's tone was a little panicked. Or rather, she was very afraid. Well, no matter how it came in, it's time for us to fight to the death. When the time comes, you listen to my command. Maybe we can still fight our way out and escape. Liunyang Ling said to Guhan, it is a meteor Yuan Ku. We are definitely not its opponent. The difference in levels is too great. The fallen realm Yuan Ku was equivalent to a human spiritual sword realm sword wielder, and a relatively powerful one at that. Compared to Guhan and Liunyang Ling who were at the treasure sword realm, there was a difference of 2 whole realms and 3 whole small realms. Such a huge difference in strength was not something that could be overcome with swordsmanship. Liunyang Ling's spirit had already reached into her dimensional pocket, aiming at a stone sealed by a dozen talismans. She had already made up her mind to use the forbidden stone to send Guhan and the others out of this place, even at the cost of her cultivation being damaged and the sword Maiden being broken. Oh, you're quite smart. You know how powerful this deity is. Ha 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 ha. The female bear laughed wildly as if she had already defeated Guhan and Liunyang Ling. By the way, little girl, you're the descendant of the Liunyang clan, right? Suddenly, the female bear began to gnash her teeth after laughing wildly. It's all your fault. It's all because of the Liunyang clan. If it wasn't for the Liunyang clan, I, a dignified ultimate god, wouldn't have ended up like this. The female bear roared furiously. I didn't expect the heavens to send the descendant of the Liunyang clan to me today. I'll tear your skin, bite your tendons, and eat your flesh to avenge the 1,000 years I've lost. Hey, Ling, looks like you've met your old enemy. Although Song Ifei was so scared that his legs were trembling, he did not forget to bicker with Liunyang Ling. What did your ancestor do to this female bear to make it hate you for 1,000 years? Oh my god, wasn't your ancestor Lord Kanzu 1,000 years ago? How would I know? Our ancestors' enemies are all over the world. 5 out of 10 Yuan who have a grudge against our ancestor. How would I know how it became our ancestor's enemy? Don't argue with me later. I have a way to get us out of here. You have to listen to me, or we'll all die here. Fleeting Time's voice was filled with resentment. I understand. I'll listen to you. Song Ifei nodded hurriedly. In an instant, she had changed from being Liunyang Ling's enemy to being Liunyang Ling's good girl, good friend, and best friend. No, don't use your last resort in a hurry. The situation is not that bad yet. Guhan stretched out his hand and pressed on the back of Liunyang Ling's hand, motioning her to calm down. When Guhan's hand touched the back of Liunyang Ling's hand, a warm current ran through Liunyang Ling's whole body. Liunyang Ling's mood actually calmed down just like that. I know. I don't want to use that thing unless it's absolutely necessary. Liunyang Ling nodded. Young man, you're quite handsome. Aren't you afraid that I'll eat you? Roar. When the female bear saw Guhan's calm look, she began to feel annoyed. She opened her mouth and roared loudly. Then, a gust of wind comparable to a Category 12 typhoon instantly raged in the whole room. If it weren't for Guhan grabbing Liunyang Ling and Song Ifei's hands, they could barely withstand the typhoon and not be blown into the sky with their strength. However, although Guhan withstood the typhoon, he could not withstand the stench that accompanied the typhoon. This female bear probably hadn't rinsed her mouth for about 1,000 years. The smell in it was even more deadly than the most poisonous poison in the world. When Song Ifei smelled it, his eyes rolled and he almost fainted. It was too pungent. Ha 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 ha, a bunch of useless little guys. This deity only roared once and you all fainted. You're so useless. How on earth did you rush to me first? Seeing that Song Ifei was about to faint, the female bear was extremely proud. From the smell in your mouth, I can tell that you've been a vegetarian for hundreds of years. Guhan fanned the smell in front of his nose, not to fan the smell out, but to fan it into his nostrils. This made Song Ifei admire Guhan very much. Such a stench, but he didn't even flinch. How strong was his perseverance? A vegetarian bear, how ridiculous. Guhan sneered at it fiercely. You little kid, I'm going to eat you. The female bear was furious at Guhan. She roared again and was about to eat Guhan into her stomach. Alright, stop pretending. If you really wanted to eat us, you should have done it long ago. There's no need to talk nonsense with me and be mocked by me. Guhan sneered, this is Zhe Tianzhendi's territory. I don't believe that a small meteor-level Yuan Ku can act so presumptuously in Zhe Tianzhendi's territory. If I'm not wrong, you should also be a Yuan Ku controlled by Zhe Tianzhendi, right? Humph. The female bear snorted and stopped talking. Obviously, this female bear had been seen through by Guhan. Just like Guhan said, she was also a Yuan Ku controlled by Zhe Tianzhendi. She couldn't do anything to Guhan, nor could she harm the lives of Guhan and the others. All she could do was talk and release a few mouthfuls of poison gas. Alright, Ling, put down your guard. This female bear can't hurt us. Guhan patted Liuyan Ling's shoulder, indicating that she should drop her guard. She's not a memory fragment like before. She's the real Yuan Ku. Guhan, you can't let your guard down. Liuyan Ling still maintained her guard. I've fought her before. Yuan Ku's memory fragments are different from hers. Memory fragments can't touch our sword bearers, but she can. She's the real Yuan Ku. I know, she's the real Yuan Ku. Guhan smiled and nodded, don't worry, I can guarantee that she can't hurt us. Am I right, Your Excellency? Hey, you said. The female bear opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she immediately closed her mouth. Her pair of bear eyes were bigger than lanterns. Her bear mouth opened and closed, and after a long time, she said in disbelief, You little guy, you actually know me. Of course I know you. Zhe Tianzhendi's subordinate, goddess Isis from the Egyptian pantheon. By the way, where are your two companions? Where are Best and Anubis? Where did they go? Why didn't I see them coming out? Guhan said with a smile. You really know me. Although it was a bear's face, one could clearly see the astonished expression on the bear's face. It's impossible for you to know me. Even 700 years ago, no one would have known that I was the subordinate of the sky-shrouding Sword Emperor. It's even more impossible for anyone to know this now. Guhan, you said that she's Isis? The Egyptian pantheon's goddess Isis? Liuyan Ling pondered for a moment. Are you mistaken? According to the Liuyan family's information, Isis was Zhe Tianzhendi's nemesis. Before Zhe Tianzhendi became Zhendi, she was Zhe Tianzhendi's enemy. It was only after His Majesty Zhe Tian ascended the throne that she disappeared, never to appear again. She spent her entire life fighting against Zhe Tianzhendi. How could she be His Majesty Zhe Tian's subordinate? Is that so? Is that how it is recorded in history? It seems that history is not something that can be trusted. Guhan smiled. Ling, you don't have to say any more. I'm certain that this female bear is Isis. Of course, Guhan was certain. After all, when Yi Qing subdued the three unlucky gods, Guhan was by Yi Qing's side and experienced the whole process. In fact, when the female bear appeared, Guhan had already recognized that she was Isis. 1,000 years had passed, but Isis's appearance had not changed at all. Plus, this was Zhe Tianzhendi's territory. If Guhan could not guess that the female bear was Isis, then Guhan could go die. If these three unlucky gods had been obediently following Zhe Tianzhendi, then it would not be surprising for them to appear in the trial formation set up by Zhe Tianzhendi. After Zhe Tianzhendi became Zhendi, the three unlucky gods were almost useless. It was a good choice to trap them here to prevent them from coming out and harming humans. Of course, this was only Guhan's guess. Guhan was also very curious. Zhe Tianzhendi had set up so many things in the trial formation. What treasures were hidden in the end? Chapter 403. Who the hell are you? How do you know this deity's name? Isis was puzzled, then suddenly began to go crazy. She suddenly appeared in front of Guhan and grabbed Guhan with her hand. Let go of him. Seeing that Guhan was grabbed by the female bear, Liuyan Ling immediately became anxious. Regardless of the fact that she was no match for Isis at all, she planned to forcibly save Guhan from her. Stop, Ling, don't move. She doesn't dare to kill me. Guhan immediately stopped Liuyan Ling. Although Guhan was grabbed by Isis, Guhan's expression was not flustered at all. Instead, he looked at the female bear very calmly. You said that I don't dare to touch you? Isis opened her big mouth and howled at Guhan again. This time, Guhan was almost facing Isis' mouth. The strong stench hit his face, and Guhan's eyes were full of tears. I'm going to eat you. Even if Yi Qing doesn't allow me to eat humans, if I eat an insignificant human, she won't have the ability to come down from that world to trouble me. At this time, Guhan could feel that Isis really wanted to kill him. She was originally the lawless Yuan Ku, but she was forcibly subdued by Yi Qing's means. It was just like Sun Wukong's band tightening curse, but if Sun Wukong really wanted to kill someone, the band tightening curse could not stop him. At most, it would make Sun Wukong suffer great pain that he could not bear. In other words, if Isis really wanted to kill Guhan, then she could pay a certain price or endure some kind of pain and forcibly kill Guhan. It all depended on how fatal the hand that Jendi left behind to control the female bear was. I'm not an insignificant person, Isis. Guhan raised his left hand and placed his palm in front of Isis. Isis, do you know what this is? How did I know you? Isis looked at Guhan's hand with disdain. Then, she was shocked and threw Guhan to the ground as if Guhan was a hot potato. It's you. It's you. Why are you here? Didn't you disappear? Isis looked very panicked. She kept retreating as if Guhan was a demon that crawled out of hell. Looks like you recognize this ring. Guhan shook his hand again. The emerald ring on his finger was particularly eye-catching. This was the source of Isis' panic, the emerald ring from Jendi. As expected, this matter has completely encircled me one after another. Although the emerald ring successfully helped Guhan escape from Isis' clutches, Guhan was not happy. Because this meant that everything that happened to him, everything that he did, might be under the control of the mastermind behind the scenes. All of his actions were within the other party's calculations. This kind of feeling made Ji Yuhan very uncomfortable. He had always been the one scheming against others. Since when was it someone else's turn to scheme against him? However, since he was already in the situation, Guhan could not escape. He could only obtain benefits that belonged to him in this situation. Guhan, are you okay? Liuyan Ling and Song Yifei rushed up together and surrounded Guhan. They stared at Isis, who seemed to be in a state of mental illness, with great vigilance. Hee hee. Isis began to laugh foolishly. This laughter sounded very stupid and silly. After a burst of silly laughter, Isis seemed to have regained her calmness. You don't have to be so vigilant against me. Just like this person said, I can't kill you. Isis snorted coldly. Yi Qing placed a talisman on me. Within the range of this trial formation, unless you take the initiative to hurt me, I definitely can't kill you. At most, I'll beat you half to death. Nonsense, when you chased me, you obviously wanted to kill me. Your murderous intent can't be hidden from me. Liuyan Ling did not believe Isis' words. When she was being chased by the other party, she really felt that the other party wanted to kill her. Otherwise, she would not have fled in such a panic. Temph, if I really wanted to kill you at that time, do you think I couldn't catch up with your speed? Let you escape from the mountainside to the entrance of the mountain? If I hadn't chased you, would you have found such a hidden trial formation? Isis asked several times in a row, leaving Liuyan Ling speechless. Indeed, Isis seemed to be telling the truth. At first, Liuyan Ling did not think so, but now that she heard Isis say this, she realized that she seemed to have been deliberately chased to the entrance of the trial formation. The person who chased her away was naturally the female bear in front of her, Isis. Did you purposely drive me into this training formation? Fleeting Time Lin could not believe that he had fallen into a trap set up by a bear. That's right, I can't stay here anymore. It's a pity that I can't leave the trial formation too far. Otherwise, I would have chased humans into this trial formation a long time ago. When the things in this trial formation are taken away, I will be free. Yi Qing will not be able to control me anymore, Ice Eyes answered very honestly. Liuyan Ling did not know what kind of expression to make. Being tricked by a bear was really not something to brag about. You said that your purpose of chasing Ling into the trial formation was to let humans take away the things in the trial formation? Ji Yuhan paused. If those things are taken away, will you be able to regain your freedom? Yes, that's what happened, Ice Eyes said firmly. All right, then get out of the way. We'll go to the end to take those things away, then you will be free, Guhan said in a deep voice. It's not that easy, Ice Eyes snorted, then walked step by step towards the wall. As she walked, she said, if you want to enter the end, there is one last hurdle, and that is to defeat me. As long as one of you can defeat me, you will naturally be able to enter the end and obtain the things inside. Otherwise, none of you will be able to enter. At this point, Ice Eyes knocked on the wall of light. Immediately, the wall of light opened, and Ice Eyes slowly walked into the wall of light. At the same time, a small bar finally rose in the middle of the room. On it was written the final test to enter the end. Defeat my servant, and you will receive the final reward. Please note, no matter how many people come to this room with, only one person is allowed to enter the room to challenge my servant. If you succeed, you will open the door to the end and receive the final reward that I have prepared for you. If you fail, you will have to take 200 steps back towards the end again. You can also choose to leave the trial formation here. Of course, once you leave, you will not receive any reward. Seems like this is really our final test. Guhan smiled bitterly. If any of you want to try, I'll let you go first. Don't look at me, I'm not going. I'm just cheering for you. Song Yifei was the first to wave his hand, indicating that he had no interest in challenging the female bear. From the conversation between Guhan and Liuyan Ling, this female bear seemed to be a meteor Yuan Ku, or some kind of god. How was he supposed to fight it? Song Yifei did not want to get involved in this mess. If I can go one step further and become a famed swordbearer, I have the confidence to fight this female bear. But the reality is, I really don't want to fight her. Liuyan Ling hesitated for a while, but still chose to give up. Although the Liuyan family's motto was to never give up, there was also a motto to know one's own limitations. Liuyan Ling was very self-aware. She had already lost to this female bear once, and she knew how big the gap between her and her opponent was. She did not want to be abused by the female bear again. The gap between the two of them was too big, to the extent that sword skills could not make up for it. Therefore, Liuyan Ling and Song Yifei focused their attention on Guhan. Liuyan Ling poked Guhan's chest. How about it? Why don't you go and try? Who knows, you might succeed. Yeah, Guhan, go and try. You won't die anyway. At most, we'll just wait here for you to come back after walking another 200 steps. Song Yifei also encouraged Guhan. All right, I'll go in now. Guhan looked at the two of them and nodded. There was no retreat. Just based on the foreshadowing that Zhetian Zhendi had planted on him, Guhan had to enter the finishing line and see what Zhetian Zhendi had up his sleeves. Liuyan Ling looked at Guhan as if she was looking at an idiot. You can't beat that bear. You're no match for her. I know, I really can't beat her. Guhan let out a long sigh, but even the two of us can't beat her. Who in this trial can beat her? I believe that Zhetian Zhendi wouldn't set a dead end for us. This female bear must have some kind of weakness. As long as I can find that weakness, I'll be able to win. Let me ask you something. You seem to have known the she-bear for a long time. If the she-bear is really the servant of the sword monarch of heaven shrouding 700 years ago, how did you know her? Fleeting time Ling suddenly changed the topic and asked an irrelevant question. I found out about it from Zhetian Zhendi's descendant. Ji Yuhan spoke without thinking. On the way here, we saved the descendant of the heaven-shrouding sword emperor, and I found out from him that His Majesty shrouding heaven has 3 Yuanshan servants. At that time, I casually tested her, and the female bear confessed on her own accord. Zhetian Zhendi's descendants. Liuyan Ling looked at Song Yifei, who nodded. That's right. Yi Wenjun, who had a dozen generations of descendants, followed us into the trial. I don't know where he is now. Go. Liu Ling sighed, and didn't stop Guhan. We'll wait for you here. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,